Don't be
right,
nervous.
we are live. All right, let me go live on Insta. All right. Okay. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Quisha King Show. Boy, do we have something great in store for you all today. As you can see, I am with my good friend, Mr. Chuck Littleton. Teach him, Chuck. And what's up? How are you?
I'm doing all right. I was actually ready around 12:30, but I was like, let me just wait until the time we agreed upon, which was roughly around 1 o'clock.
Yeah.
But yeah, I've been ready to speak on this for a long time. So it's a great way to get your Saturday started. Up here in Michigan, we still get those frigid temps. Like we're into March, April, but today it's unseasonably warm up here. So
it's
uh,
because we about to bring that heat.
yeah,
It's
we about to
warm.
yeah,
We
maybe
about to
that's
bring
what it
that heat.
is. Maybe that's what it is. So I'm feeling good. I'm feeling good. It's a nice day out, and yeah. Let's get into it, man. It's nothing I like to do more.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. So on Instagram, they are tuning in from Dubai. Well, hello. We're going international, baby.
We're going all the way to UAE, huh? Okay.
Yes. So what's up to the chat? Make sure you share this video out. I think it's going to be a very important conversation that we have concerning those of us that consider ourselves on the right, or conservatives, Republicans, whatever you want to call it. This is a much needed conversation. And Chuck and I had actually had this planned since last week. And then all the things happened on Twitter with Candace and just Jordan Peterson and all that stuff. So we've been talking about this, but this was already planned. So it just kind of worked all together. So what I first want to do is talk about, what happened yesterday, over the last couple of days with Mrs. Farmer, as you addressed her in your
You
in
If
your
you want to
interview.
know, you want to know funny. This a quick funny story about that. So as I was live streaming from Instagram, and yeah, I'm doing my little preamble. I'm going through the motions, and I hinted at the fact that I was going to be calling out a few of your favorite content creators. People who consider themselves to be conservatives on the right. And someone in the comment section, they said it. They said he must be talking about Miss Farmer or Miss Farmer or something with a question mark. So somebody in the comment section said it, and it gave me that thought. And so I just kept referring to her as Mrs. Farmer throughout the entire video because of what somebody in the live chat said. It was totally unplanned. So whoever that, I can't remember who it was that said it in the comment, but shout out to him. They gave me that idea. So yeah.
I mean, it's appropriate. I mean, that is her name. Yeah. I mean, yeah. So
and the little dust up that Chad O. Jackson caused,
right,
on Instagram, and I think maybe his Twitter, about her not using her husband's last name, and public or
I mean, it was a great observation. I think accurately. So I mean, anyway.
And so I was doing it on purpose to be funny. But go ahead.
Yeah, no, it was noted. It was well timed.
I bet it was.
I'm looking for anyway. Okay, so if you guys didn't see what has been happening over the last few days on Twitter, I'm gonna get you up to speed, and I want to know Chuck's thoughts on it. He's not really online like that, like me on Twitter and stuff, and I'm always like, you gotta get on Twitter, because I think Chuck being on Twitter would be really, really great. But So let me just give you guys like the quick version. So there was this report that came out saying that, you know, there has been a rise in anti-Semitism online. And they called out people by name. They mentioned Candace, they mentioned Tucker, they mentioned some other people, Tucker Carlson. I'm going to play like the video that they played. It's a pretty short video. So let's see. I gotta share my screen. I think it is. Hold on, y'all. Trying to make sure I got all of my, you know, points and all that stuff together. I'm like, it's a lot to gather. I don't know how Chad Jackson does it, but he does it so well. Okay, so here we go. Let's share this. Here we'll do it like this, and
since the advent of Christianity, Christ is King has been a cry for connection to the divine, a declaration of faith, a moving signal between Christians of their shared values. But what happens when it becomes a manipulation tactic designed to deceive Christians? Mentions of Christ as King have increased fivefold on platforms like X in just the past 4 years. At first glance, it would seem hopeful as people begin to reinvestigate faith in the face of increasing secularization and chaos in the world. But the NCRI, an organization at the forefront of monitoring deep trends in data, observed a striking and nefarious development around the phrase Christ beginning in 2021. In 2024, more than 50% of all engagements around Christ is King posts were driven by extremist influencers. The word extremist gets used a lot, and many are understandably skeptical at its use. But we're talking about people like this.
I used sex as a tool to make women love me so they'd obey me and live in my house and make me money.
Catholics and Christians were going missing on Passover, then they would find bodies, and they were able to trace them back to Jews. Blood Bible.
Real Africans, on average, have an IQ of 65.
Posts like these achieved over 13.6 million views and more than 100,000 engagements during Easter 2024 alone. While co-opting the phrase for their toxic narrative, figures like Candace Owens and Jake Shields repeat hateful blood libels. And shockingly, by 2024, the most frequently associated term with Christ as King was the word Jew. The intent is clear: manipulate well-meaning, faithful Christians into having their beliefs tethered to psychopaths. This is nothing short of diabolical. We're caught watching Christ is King being taken by the supremacist right more and more each day. These connections matter. The spiritual, the linguistic, the interpersonal. They shape us, they shape our society, and they shape the world. So what kind of connections do we want to build? And more importantly, what kind of world will we help create? Help retake our values.
So yeah, so that was oops, let's see, how do I get wow, hold on, let me see why this is okay, there we go. So that was the the video version of the report that this group did. And Candace, well, first I'm going to take you guys through the whole thing. So first, Andrew Klavan said something. He tweeted, he said, the problem with arguing with anti-Semites is that they are genuinely as stupid as bricks. They say, quote, Christ is King, and quote, America first, then make excuses for Iran's government of radical Islamists dedicated to U.S. destruction. They think, quote, Gentiles have tormented and persecuted Jews in one nation after another, so there must be something wrong with Jews. Really, Sherlock? Really, Sherlock? They're not even smart enough to be feckless clowns. Jews are less than 3% of our population and have made amazing contributions in science, industry, finance, and entertainment, and that's not even mentioning the bagels. Oh, the bagels. And while Jews have their evildoers just like everyone else, the anti-Semitic conspiracy theories about Nagasaki and Bolsheviks and Leo Frank are truly the work of semi-literate morons. I know they like to flood social media with ugly garbage. It's all they've got, but paying attention to them lowers your IQ more than fluoride and doesn't even help your teeth. Best to leave them to play with themselves. So that's what Andrew Klavan said. Jordan Peterson came in and said, wait, let me see. Hold on. Oh, no. So Candace responded to that and she said, thank you for re-upping this most crucial conversation about, quote, Christ is King. Almost exactly a year later, and once again during the season of Lent, after a year of thoughtfulness, I want you to know that I will never stop declaring it. All right, so that was her thing. So then Jordan Peterson, I know, Chuck, just
I'm cool. Go through it all. It's cool. Take your time.
So then Jordan Peterson comes in and just, as we say, drug Candace. I mean, it was pretty epic. He says, Candace Owens, and he added her, a true pharisaical pretender. I think that's how you say it. She vociferously proclaimed her devotion to Christ for no other reason than that to elevate her perceived status. Her outrage is designed not to shout the truth from the rooftops, but build bridges or make peace, but to subvert Christianity itself with its new force to her own purposes. She is literally using God's name in vain. There are few more unforgivable sins. Okay. Then, and this is, so I have to, because it's kind of long, I had to.
Take your time.
Let me see. Let's see. Because I want you guys to get the full context of this whole entire thing, as it's been being revealed throughout. So here is the other post along with what Jordan Peterson said. So, all right. So he says,
and this is going to be new to me as well as you presented. I haven't seen this.
Yes, no, you have not seen any of this. So, okay, so let's go here. So he says, let's see if I can make this a little bit bigger for y'all. Then he goes on to say, woe to you. He starts quoting the Bible. Woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, you hypocrites. You are like whitewashed tombs, which appear beautiful on the outside, but inside are full of dead men's bones and every kind of filth. Woe to you, teachers of the law and Pharisees, you hypocrites. You clean the outside of the cup and dish, but inside they are full of greed and self-indulgence. And I believe that this is Jesus's word. So the Christ that they are declaring, like he's quoting Christ. Okay.
Yeah, this one his first post, he uses the term pharisaical, which is a play, of course, on the Pharisees. And so that's what Jordan is talking about, and everyone who is familiar with Christ and his interactions with the Pharisees and the scribes can easily pick up on what Jordan Peterson is putting down. But go ahead, you can finish reading.
He says, you shut the door of the kingdom of heaven in people's faces. You yourselves do not enter, nor will you let those enter who are trying to. All this for the Machiavellians who dare to use what is good for their own vile purposes. Finally, if she wasn't the worst of hypocrites, she would forswear the Tate brothers, but they draw attention, and for a pretender, all attention is good attention, even at the cost, say, of the pearl of great price. So that was Jordan's tweet, and he then so Candace then responds, and I just have a little clip. She made a whole video, but it's just a little clip. So we're I just want to give the full context of it. So
I know. I gotta sit through it.
That the most
What's that?
No, I just gotta sit through it. I'm gonna tell you something, Quisha. it's beyond the point where it's just the words that are that like what she's saying. I am so disgusted with this woman to the point where the sound of her voice is, I find her insufferable in every way, shape, form, or fashion. From the content of her words to the mere sound of her voice, this woman is insufferable. That's why I gestured the way I did, but I know I have to get through it in order to give an honest take on what's going on. So I'll get through it. Just play what you got to play.
All right, so
egregious thing that I had done was used Christ is king against a Jew. And that is just completely not factual. I've never once uttered that phrase at a Jew at the time that.
I just want to point out,
she is such
did use that phrase.
I say she is such a liar, Quisha. She is such an unconscionable liar and gaslighter. It is just, I mean, a child could decipher this level of lowbrow manipulation. It is insane. I don't know who she thinks she's fooling, who she thinks she's getting over on, but this is unbelievable. Go ahead.
Yes, I just want to just pin that in your heads while we play the rest. But she did say that she said it to Ben Shapiro.
This happened in March. I had not tweeted that phrase, I don't believe, since the prior November is what he was referring to. And I certainly did not tweet it at any Jew. And so an entire scandal was born overnight, really, when people just began going, what is this? Obviously, it's Easter week, and we are having somebody essentially try to make it sound as though saying the phrase Christ is king is derogatory in a circumstance if you utter it at a Jew, and yet that circumstance had not happened. And I take questions and people that attack my faith or attack the reason that I have said something very seriously. I take it very seriously. And in the context that I had used the phrase Christ is king was perfectly acceptable. The prior November, I tweeted it because the media was trying to get me to engage in an attack against my colleague, and I decided to abstain. And I said, blessed are the peacemakers. And I thought that I was choosing peace in that moment. And indeed, that certainly backfired. Anyways, why are we speaking about this today? Well, like I said, many of you have noticed that there has just sort of been these increasing, if you want to call it commentary that is coming from Daily Wire management, Daily Wire commentators regarding things that I've said, positions that I have, or just appearances that I am making. And, you know, I would like to really leave the Daily Wire in the rearview mirror, which is why when I covered these statements last week, when I went on Theo Von's podcast and Ian Carroll went on Joe Rogan's podcast on the same day, and some people, I would say a small minority, were apoplectic, even though I thought that the conversation was really funny. And I think also illuminating for a lot of people who are getting to see me as opposed to having me being caricatured by the media, just being able to see what I believe in, like what I believe in as a Christian. Obviously, that is where I stand, why I am against what Bibi Netanyahu is doing. And that's just not something that is going to change because people are calling me anti-Semitic. I have a Christian perspective on the murder of children, and it doesn't adapt if that child is a Jew or if that child is a Christian, if that child is a Palestinian, or if that child is Israeli.
Yeah. So I take, I take it offensively that she's saying she's a Christian, and then also saying, that, somehow it's in line with the Bible that Israel doesn't defend itself, or somehow it's in line with labeling a group of people, all one thing, all of these things. Anyway, basically everything she was saying is exactly what we were going to be talking about. I was like, wow, this is like
teed it up for us.
That's right. This is like really, it's incredible. So the first thing I want to ask you, well, first, let me get your reaction to that whole situation scenario.
Well, first off, before I get into any particulars, what I find amazing is how, yes, Jordan Peterson is immensely popular. arguably the most popular, the most noteworthy, noticeable public intellectual or intellectual in general in the world right now, which is saying something, because we always, talk about how the I guess the globalizing effects of secularism, or how a lot of these ideas that we commonly refer to as these sorts of ideas that are just synonymous traditionally with the hard left, the way these ideas have sort of swept the globe, but yet and still a man in Jordan Peterson, who is fighting against this scourge, has sort of risen to the top to become the most famous intellectual in the world, sort of going against this tide within academia, right? And you have someone in Candace Owens, and even in Andrew Klavan. For those of you who don't know, who are unfamiliar with Andrew Klavan, even if you look at the Daily Wire, the four horsemen of the Daily Wire, no pun intended. You have, of course, Ben Shapiro, Matt Walsh, and Matthew Knowles, or Michael Knowles, I'm sorry. And then you have Andrew Klavan. Now, out of the four of them, Andrew Klavan, he has about 800,000 some subscribers on YouTube. But of the four, he's probably the least popular, right? If you look at his overall, his subscribers, the number of subscribers that he has.
Yeah.
And, me personally, I said long ago, when the quote unquote beef between Ben Shapiro and Candace Owens first began, and I remember there were rumors swirling around the internet that they were planning to have some sort of public debate. Right. And I said back then that intellectually speaking, Ben Shapiro would debate her under the table. As an old sports saying goes, especially if we're talking about the conflict between the Arabs and the Israelis. If you want to talk about that, I said Ben Shapiro would make a fool out of her. As the old sports adage goes, she could carry Ben Shapiro's jockstrap in a briefcase, right? But when you want to start talking about, and that just goes to show you the kind of, I guess, material, the kind of knowledge you get over there at the Daily Wire if you follow any of their content creators. But Andrew Klavan, in my humble opinion, gives a different kind of a spin. He gives a different sort of, adds a different mixture to what the Daily Wire has going on over there, because Andrew Klavan, he's sort of like the elder statesman of the group. He comes with more philosophic wisdom, and he's just a very, if anyone has ever bothered to take the time to listen to Andrew Klavan, again, he's someone who was he's an ethnic Jew, okay. He said he had a hard time when early on in his life believing in God. As a Jew, he didn't believe. He sort of became agnostic, and from being an agnostic, he eventually became, I guess it's fair to call him a full-fledged atheist. And then he read Crime and Punishment. And, he eventually began to read the writings of the Marquis de Sade. And, and he had another special incident that occurred in his life that kind of gave him that moment where he figured, I really have to, I have to find Jesus. And ironically, Andrew Klavan said that it wasn't until he found Jesus that he understood what it meant to be a Jew. He never really felt like a Jew until he found Jesus. That's when Judaism made sense to him. Okay. And I say all that to, about Andrew Klavan, because again, if you look at his profile on social media and you compare that to Candace Owens, it's a shame. It just goes to show you where we are in America today, when someone like Andrew Klavan and someone like Jordan Peterson is, and again, I understand Jordan Peterson is wildly popular and a lot of people listen to him. But Candace Owens, in comparison, even if we were to sit Jordan Peterson aside for a second, Candace Owens, in comparison to someone like an Andrew Klavan, they are so light years ahead of one another in terms of intellect, in terms of insightfulness, in terms of profundity. It is the schism between the two of them. It's like it would be like, Andrew Clay, it's like bringing just killing an ant with a sledgehammer, to quote Jay-Z. I mean, it's amazing. And the fact that this woman can sit up here with the utmost confidence, with the utmost arrogance, and say some of the most asinine things, especially as it pertains to, never mind when you start getting into the weeds, you get into the particulars when it comes to her understanding of the theology, her understanding of philosophy and these sorts of things. But even when she is talking about contemporary geopolitical matters, she speaks about things with the utmost ignorance, that it is amazing to me the level, how oblivious and the lack of self-awareness that this woman has. She doesn't even couch or preface her words by suggesting that she might be wrong. She is so sure of herself.
That's the part, the confidence.
I am
that she says it. Yeah.
Yes, I am almost embarrassed for her. But if I wasn't so put off by her, I would be embarrassed for her. But I mean, that's who she is, and that's where we are.
Yeah.
And but yeah, go ahead, Keisha. I know you probably want to, Adam.
Well, I was just gonna say, statements like what she's been saying over the past year, and people who are flocking to her, and joining in with her, is why we have seen, that we started to question, like, who really is a conservative, like who's really on the right, who's really on the left. Why does people like Tucker and Candace and others, why do they sound like the left? Like, why are they sounding so similar? And
I know.
you in your video, which you guys, if you look in the description, I put a link to Chuck's video there. So after this, please go and watch the whole thing. It is really, really good. And he has a whole series. But you said this word, you were like Islamo-communism. You kind of coined this phrase, Islamo-communism. And something that I noticed years ago, which I didn't understand, and I'm understanding it more now with help from you and just my broader understanding of communism and the Palestinian thing and the Israel thing. You hear these people have the same structure of the left. For instance, BLM. Let's take the Christ is King. Black Lives Matter. Oh, if you don't say Black Lives Matter, what are you trying to say? If you don't say Christ is King, like, this is what we're seeing on Twitter. If you don't say the exact phrase, then what are you trying to hide? Oh, you're just a Zionist. Are you a Christian Zionist? Like, they start to question what you really believe if you're not saying this phrase. Right. They start to question your allegiance to America. Like, Bill, right. Are you, what are you saying about Black people? So do you think that Black people are, Black lives don't matter? It's this trying to trap you into this agreement with this statement. And if you don't do it, then you're not virtuous. It's the virtue signaling again. It's what else is happening? It's this idea that we're going to take a group of people for 2020 and for decades. It's been Black folks. Oh, Black people are victims, and you can't say anything about Black people, and only Black people can give you can tell the story of Blackness in America, and yada yada yada. They're saying the same thing. Candace, in that same video, pulls up that report, and she says, look at all the people who wrote this report. I'm just going to read the names. They're all Jewish.
You see,
they're all Jewish. So how can a Jewish person say anything about Christianity? Like, this is, to me, this is stupid. It's like, because is the report true is the question that we should be asking. Just like with the BLM stuff, is this true about the police killing black men? That should have been the question, but that's not the question for these, you know, these woke right people who just, I'm just going to call them like that. They're not asking that. They're saying, who's saying it?
Yeah.
Who's
Yeah.
saying it? And then we can determine, like, you know, if that is something we should pay attention to.
But you
So,
see how
anyway, go ahead.
you see, and you know, and they play these games, Quisha. You see, none dare call it a conspiracy. They're just simply stating facts, I guess, for the sake of knowledge, right? I guess knowledge is good for its own sake, so I suppose. But you have to present me with a rationale for. You have to contextualize the information for me by telling me the rationale or explaining the rationale as to why I should care. Why does this matter? Why do you keep, you know, your little little breadcrumbs, your Hansel and Gretel breadcrumbs keep bringing you back to some guy named Mordecai or somebody whose name ends in Berg or Stein, but you're not telling me why it matters, right? But you're implying that something is going on. But when you get called out for not expressing exactly what it is that you're trying to say, again, classic gaslighting. You turn the narrative around on the person who's asking you the question by suggesting that they're being a little bit too sensitive for reading into things that aren't there, as if you didn't say what you said quite deliberately. You're saying what you're saying for a reason. Now tell me why you're saying it and stop playing with me. For example, Quisha, if you were in a you know, if you're married, you know, I'm married, right? If you know, if you were to I don't know, if you were to leave the home for a while, and perhaps you said you'd be back in an hour, but for something happened, may have been an accident, traffic, whatever. Maybe you came home in an hour and a half, right? You know, if if your husband, your significant other, you know, just was questioning you about, you know, where you been, you know, what took you so long? Oh no, I was out. I went where I said I was going. But and again, you may communicate with them. Well, here's what happened, and here's why. But if at every time things don't line up precisely how you thought they would, if your significant other question you every time, if you got a notification on your phone a certain time of night, or if someone you know, and they would ask you, what is the point of them asking you? Are they asking you just because they want to know, or is it as your spouse? I have the right to know when you leave the house what you're doing every minute of the day, especially if you don't call when you say you're going to call, if you don't show up at home when you say you're going to show up at home. Don't I have the right as your spouse to ask you? Now, you may have the right as my spouse to ask me, generally speaking, but you're asking me for a reason. Now, what is that reason? Is it because you think that I may be out doing something that I am not supposed to be doing? Oh, I never said that. But wait a minute.
Right.
But you keep inquiring about what it is that I'm doing as if you don't trust me. Oh, I never said I didn't trust you. Why are you reacting like that? Do you have something to hide? No, I'm just offended at the fact that I show you the utmost loyalty and respect, and you keep questioning me about things that should be inconsequential. But you're asking me for a reason, not simply because you want to know what I'm doing, because what I am doing is not simply trivial. I know that to be a fact, or else you wouldn't ask. You're asking me for a reason. Now, why are you saying what you're saying? See, it goes back to what she said when she had. I wish you. I wish you would have had the events, the conversation, I guess the back and forth she had with Ben Shapiro. When Ben Shapiro was asked, he was at a public forum somewhere, giving a speech or something, and someone had asked him about Candace Owens, and you know, he reacted. I perhaps wouldn't have reacted the way he did, but it probably had got to the point where he was quite fed up with the things that she had been saying. Maybe even behind closed doors, we don't know, in the Daily Wire offices or wherever. I think we're based in Tennessee somewhere now. I don't know, but whether it was behind closed doors or whether it was in public, those at the Daily Wire, the decision makers at the Daily Wire, and sure enough, you know, Ben Shapiro, they always talk about how he was the founder of the Daily Wire. But you have Ben Shapiro, you have a Protestant Christian, I think, and Andrew Clavin, I believe he's a Protestant Christian. You have two Catholics, and Michael Knowles and Matt Walsh. You have Jeremy Boring, who I believe is a Christian, and you have this one lowly lowly Jew here in Ben Shapiro. But of course, he rules the root. Little twerpy little Ben Shapiro. I guess he has all of this sway over over everything. He's Jewish, and again, much of his all of his compatriots are either Christian or Catholics. If you don't consider Catholicism to be a form of Christianity, that's a separate conversation, right? But it's funny. It's like they knew something that the rest of us did not know before we all knew it. The same exact thing with Tucker Carlson when he was let go from Fox News. Everyone thought, man, what is going on? Why did they let their most popular on-air personality go? And then shortly thereafter, we began to see, I guess, the quote unquote real Tucker Carlson or the Tucker Carlson that he had eventually became. Now, she's questioning. Now, go back. Now, she's questioning Israel's war tactics or its war policy, its war position toward not the Palestinians, of course, but the wider pan Arabian sort of a movement. This kind of a modern day attempt at reinstituting a global caliphate, and we'll get to that, because I noticed when she was speaking, and this is why I was getting so upset. And if you go back to my last video, this is why I spent a great deal of time sort of walking through, giving a kind of rudimentary walkthrough of some of the primary tenets of Islam, particularly with respect to Islam's opinion toward the dhimmi, or the people of the book, which they refer to as Jews and Christians. There's no mention of Muslims when they speak, right? They're only mention of Jews. Now, Candace Owens thinks she's slick because she said what she said, because remember, her and Tucker Carlson, because they had a conversation with each other. Because there is this notion that the United States bends over backwards to cater to the will of Israel, right?
Right.
And it seems to be, and this is their perspective, because it seems to be extremely hypocritical, considering the fact that our geopolitical position towards Israel rests on the fact that Jews face an existential threat from their Muslim rivals in the region, whilst at the same time, there are Christians dying in other countries. So remember, her and Tucker Carlson said, why aren't we involved in other countries, militarily speaking, in Africa and in the Middle East, where Christians are being slaughtered, right? And so if you have this idea in your mind, like those of her ilk, that AIPAC and whatever other Zionist Jewish kind of lobby has sort of colonized America, the American body politic, then again, there's the justification as to why this is actually occurring. We are ignoring the slaughter of Christians on behalf or at the expense. We are ignoring them at their expense in order to cater to Jews who have this sort of unjust or immoral sway over the American body politic, because Christian lives should matter too. And then when you look in that, and it's not to say that Christian lives don't matter, but when you look at what she's saying, when she's talking about how Christian and Catholic children were coming up missing, and it was all pointing back to the Jew. See, if you go back, and I this is why, I have to take it to the Bible, just briefly.
Yeah,
because what Candace, and I saw another tweet, somebody sent it to me. They wanted to get my take on it, or they mentioned me under a post when making reference to the Syrian civil war or the uprisings in Syria, when you have a lot of these religious minorities that are being slaughtered in Syria. They talk about the 1,000 or so, and the body count is probably still rising of people that have been slaughtered in Syria. They talk about all the Christians and whatnot that are being slaughtered in Syria, and some of the other religious minorities there. The Post suggested that Israel, along with the United States, orchestrated the coup of Assad. This is the Post that I saw. This is this whole a point of view, Quisha, that we're talking about. This person posed, and they were blue check mark for what it's worth. I don't remember who it was. Said that the Israeli government, working in conjunction with the American government, deliberately toppled the Assad regime, because Assad, although he was not a good man, he was a tyrant and a dictator in many respects, but at least he had respect for the Christians in Syria. He protected the Christians of Syria. And the entire point, the point of ousting Assad was to slaughter Christians. And this just goes to show you the hatred and the contempt that Israel has for Christians. This is what this person posted, as if having another Islamic fundamentalist regime in the Middle East surrounding the country of Israel is in the best interest of Israel's national security to have an even more fundamentalist Islamic regime on its doorstep, just so Israel can exercise its bloodlust for wanting to kill more Christians. See, if you look at the historical context of it, let's just call a spade, because people are people no matter what their religion is, and there have been religious conflict and religious strife down the centuries for as long as we could remember. Okay. Right. In the early times, because one of the key differences between Islam and Christianity and Islam has this one thing in common when it comes to the spreading of each faith, respectively. These are, I guess you can call them, for lack of a better term, just kind of crusading, or there's an evangelical element, if you will, to both Islam and Christianity. Right, to convert. Christianity wants to gain converts. Islam wants to gain converts. If you listen to most Jewish historians and Jewish scholars, they will tell you that Judaism is not the same in this regard. So once again, seeing as how Judaism and the Hebrew Bible is the basis, it is the foundation of both Christianity and Islam. Both Christianity and Islam, and whether you're a supersessionist or not, again, don't mean to get too theological, but whether you're a supersessionist or not, both Christianity and Islam, in some respect or another, see themselves as not so much continuations, but almost usurping or superseding that which preceded it, which was everything that was outlined in the Torah and in the Tanakh, right? So, and I say all that to say that in the earlier stages, if you go back to the Bible, remember when Jesus was crucified, and remember in the book of Matthew in chapter, I think it was 27, beginning in somewhere around verse 24, when Pontius, when he hands Jesus over, right? And remember when Pontius declared Jesus innocent, but gave in to the will of the mob because they wanted Barabbas instead. Remember what Pontius Pilate said? He said, this is a, a lot of translations, but essentially he said, this is a just man. I see no fault in him.
Right.
And let the blood of this man, what did Pontius say? Let the blood of this man be upon you and your children. Right. So in the early days, especially when, of course, the Christianity became the state religion of the Roman Empire and so on and so forth. This is when the early church fathers in the Roman Catholic Church used the propaganda of what they called the deicide in order to gain converts, because Christianity was the new kid on the block. It was the new thing. Right. And in order to get folks to gain converts, the church waged this propaganda campaign against Jews throughout the empire and later on, because remember, when Jesus walked the earth, after Jesus was crucified, the Roman Empire fell shortly thereafter, not counting Eastern Rome, or what we refer to as the Byzantine Empire. The Roman Empire fell. And then you had these little pockets, and Christianity began to spread across Eastern Europe and across the European subcontinent and so on and so forth. Okay. And there was all throughout medieval Europe, Quisha. Again, this is not me trying to, because this is another thing you hear from a lot of these people. Well, I'm just saying, they try to pretend as though, well, Jews are just uber sensitive, because if you look at Jews look at the numbers with respect to their high visibility profile. You buy into these elders of the protocols of the elders of Zion type conspiracies, because there is no way that Jews are this overly represented in fields where we can visibly see them, considering the fact that there aren't many of them. So
Right.
they leverage their status as victims in order to gain a political leg up, in order to gain a social leg up. So they want to foment this idea that the Jews are constantly being put upon, and this is how they in fact get over on you, when that is the most ridiculous. It's just not true. Because if you look at the historical record, I don't care how you feel about it, people are still people. Especially, say, for example, you look at the Protestant strain of Christianity, they have criticized the Catholic Church all day and talk about how the Catholic Church engaged in all sorts of, beginning when, of course, when Jesus, tells Peter, "You are the rock upon which I will build my church." And then when the Protestant strain of Christianity rose up, then there was all of these criticisms. When you look at the Martin Luther's thesis about everything that the Catholic Church was doing. Okay, fine, fair enough. So the Catholic Church got a lot of things wrong. Oh, okay, well, you don't say. Okay,
Right.
that's just for the sake of argument. Let's just
Let
say.
me just say, that is the same thing. It's like this. We want this, just like on the left. They want this perfectionism. Oh my gosh, America had slaves, so the whole thing is bad. It's internally, the fabric of this country is racist because we had slaves. It's the same thing. Oh, Jews did some bad things, so all of them are terrible.
Right.
It goes against everything that the Bible teaches.
Exactly.
Like,
That's what Jordan Peterson is getting.
This is the point. We all and fallen short of the glory of God. Like everybody, God, he literally tells you not to separate because humanity fell. Okay, humanity.
Right. If you look at, and this is my point, and my long rant there. My point was to say that the Christian church, because she talked about Jewish, she's talking about Saint Hugh in the libel that happened at Norwich. That's what she's talking about. Okay, this and again, this is totally unsubstantiated, no proof whatsoever that Jews were slaughtering children and using their blood to make their Passover breads.
Just a quick note, in passing I heard somebody talking about this, and I don't know how, I haven't looked it up, but this guy, I think he's from Canada, but he was saying, and I don't know if he's Jewish or not, but he was saying that when people started looking into this, they uncovered these graves of children, that it was all propaganda.
Yes.
Like, they none of it ever happened, but somebody said it on publicly said it, and people just ran with it, and they never even bothered to check to see if these graves of, quote unquote, graves of children was real. Now I don't know, but that's what he said.
Because listen, Jews were kept out of many economic opportunities throughout Europe. This was after Simon Bar in the failed rebellion against the Roman Empire, when Emperor Hadrian scattered the Jews. Many of them went into Europe, and they were beckoned to country after country after country because, of course, the Jews, their significant role, particularly within the economic sphere, became the money lenders of Europe because they were phased out of many different economic opportunities. So they became merchants. They were heavily involved in the textile industry, and all sorts of other things. And so what happened was, when the Bedouins, the Mohammedans, the Saracens, the Muslims, in other words, when they sacked Jerusalem and the Crusades began against Saladin, after they sacked Jerusalem, where do you think the Crusaders got the funding from and the resources from to finance their crusades? They got them from Jewish lenders. The whole backstory behind this notion of the blood libel was so that they could destroy the bonds that proved, in fact, that certain barons owed a debt to the Jews for having lended them monies in order to fund the crusade against the Mohammedans in order to take back Jerusalem. A lot of the hatred towards the Jews, or these frame-up jobs of Jews, was due to the fact that there were a lot of barons, which is sort of like the class kind of right below the nobility, kings and so on and so forth, were in debt to Jews, and in order to wipe the debt clean, they would say certain things. For example, to Quisha, they would say, if I were to, and you're talking centuries ago, so there weren't no computers, there weren't any kind of digital footprints or records of certain things. They wrote everything down, right? And so if you signed a paper stating that, okay, if I lend me something, here's what right? In order to wipe out any evidence that I owed you a debt, the only thing that I needed to do was destroy the record of the debt. So what the kings did, right, working in conjunction with the church, and this is why it goes into the Medici family, because they took after a lot of the practices that the Jews were doing, because they had got into money lending. It's a whole thing, right? And so what they would do is they would incite the wrath of the mob against the small Jewish contingent in whatever European country, and they would sack the homes of the Jews, and they would raid their chests. They would raid their, and so they would destroy the records of these debts, so they wouldn't have to pay these debts back. But they needed an excuse in order to destroy the records of these debts. And so you had a lot of that stuff occurring, right? And so to go back to my point that I wanted to make about this, and I don't care, diehard, you can be as Christian as you want to be. The fact of the matter is, and this is why I made it a point to bring up the schism between the Catholic Church and the Protestant strain of Christianity, and all this various other nonconformist sets, because it seems to keep splintering off. That's why we have so many different Protestant sets today, right? But the reality is that the Christian church persecuted Jews for centuries. I don't care how you feel about it. I don't care if you don't like it. This is not about how it makes you feel. This is not about eliciting some kind of emotion to try to push a modern day political agenda, right? And we'll get to that too, right? In terms of really kind of this whole America First thing and what's really at the root of this, right? But that's the truth. Jews were persecuted for centuries by Christians on theological grounds, because it was the Jews that the Christian propagandists who wanted to increase its numbers, increase its membership for tithings and all sorts of other things, as the Christian church began to rise and become the dominant institution throughout the European subcontinent. In order to drive up their ranks, they waged this propaganda campaign against the Jews by claiming that it was the Jews that committed the ultimate act of sin and corruption and wickedness by essentially killing a god. It was the Jews who committed the act of the deicide. And it was not until roundabout the time when the Enlightenment, from the Renaissance all the way to the Enlightenment in the late 1700s, and the Christians in Britain began to, of course, if you go back to my video, I've talked about this in part 3, as a matter of fact, in my video, where Britain began to take charge in this push to establish a homeland for the Jewish peoples in their indigenous home of Judea, their indigenous home of Jerusalem. But until then, oh no. Jews were not treated kindly across Europe until right about the time of the Enlightenment. And I don't care how you feel about it. That's just a fact. Jews were being persecuted on theological grounds, and right around the time when you saw this nationalism resurgence across the world, but particularly in Europe in the mid 1800s. I even covered this in my video when I talked about the Great Revolutions of 1830, right? Then all of a sudden it became that the community or a nation became what was defined by, of course, its common language, its common its common culture, its common language, its common history, its common traditions, right? And so with that being said, Jews bought into, by and large, the liberalizing ideas of the Enlightenment, that they could become a part of whatever nation that they found themselves in when these ideas became in vogue. Yes, they were Jewish, but they considered themselves to be British first. Yes, they were Jewish, but they considered themselves to be French first and German first, and so on and so forth. But then you began to see this backlash against Jews because they still held on, by and large, to their Jewish traditions. So they were never quite seen as part of the wider society because they were always looked at as the exotic other, because they maintained this sense of a unique Jewish identity. Once nationalism became all the rage in the 1800s, leading up to the First World War, Jews became unwanted on quote unquote racial grounds. And this is when you began to see the popularization of this term we use today called anti-Semitic. This was popularized, of course, by a political activist in Germany by the name of Wilhelm Marr. But prior to that, Jews were persecuted on religious grounds by both Muslims and Christians, but by Christians especially. As a matter of fact, many of Jews, once the caliphate rose, many of Jews opted to live under the Sultanate as opposed to living under the dictates of the church fathers of Rome, because they were treated better by Muslims prior to than they were treated by Christians in Europe. That's just a fact.
And I think we have to remember, because something happened with my Instagram. I can't comment over there. I don't know what I did. I hit some button. But Cruise Missile, who watches our show, he was saying that rabbis have admitted that they do this to the children themselves. And I just want to say, okay, we have Christians that are heretical too. Like, we have just because you belong to a group, like we have Black people that do stuff that other Black people don't agree with. There are Christians who we see them all the time. Jamal Bryant, he is heretical, but he brands himself as a Christian. So Cruz, and anybody else who's, you can be a part of a group and have people that say and do things that the majority of the group doesn't align with, or that is not true. Jamal Bryant gets up Sunday after Sunday and says things about the Bible and things about God's people that is not true.
I'll tell you, Quisha.
Like, nobody is saying like, oh my God, Christianity, all the Christians are, blah, blah, blah. Nobody does that. I don't know why we treat Jewish people differently when they truly have a dual. You can be Jewish and not ethnically Jewish, or you could be ethnically Jewish and not religiously Jewish. Like, but you are still labeled a Jew, and so we don't give them any grace. I guess that's
right. Sorry, Quisha.
Particularly by Christians, when we should be
know.
example of showing grace, because that is what we are called to do, because they are still our brothers and sisters who are because we have accepted Christ and they haven't. They are still our brothers and sisters who are lost, and we should treat them just like any other person that we want their soul to be saved as well. Why do we have to go out and start? Like and I know, Chuck, you don't you don't really do the theological part much.
I will when I need to.
But I'm just saying, like, why do we treat them differently? Like, why aren't we treating them like any other lost soul? Where's the grace for that? And this whole Christ is King thing, and you not really walking and doing what Christ would do. I don't play with God like that. That's what it pisses me off. Anyway.
Because you see, and the uniqueness of it all is that no matter what the gripe is, no matter what the issue is, you can always shoehorn Jews into whatever kind of convenient narrative that you want to spin, right? Let me hit you with a quote here, because I'm sorry if I could find it quickly. Here it is. Wait a minute. Hold on. Because I pulled up here my my YouTube, my notes for my YouTube piece, which ended up being what, 43 pages long. Yeah, it ended up being 43 pages long. If I could just find it ever so quickly, because I just want to briefly just talk about the hypocrisy here. Hold on. Yeah. Here's a quote from Rabbi Goldman, from Rabbi Yossi Goldman. He said, in Poland, they hated the Jews because they were poor. In Germany, they hated the Jews because they were rich. In Russia, they hated the Jews because they were bourgeois capitalists. And in America, they hated the Jews because they were communists. In Europe, they say move back to Palestine. But in Palestine, they say move back to Europe, right? 3% of the population, right? If you want to, I mean, that seems to be about accurate. I'm going off of what Andrew Clavin said. But yet and still, somehow, Jews carry Jews carry sway over everything that, everything that America does, everything, any any government in the world for that matter. I guess Jews just somehow magically run the entire planet. It doesn't matter what conspiracy, it doesn't matter. You can always shoehorn the Jews in. Oh, the rabbis admitted that I remember there was this, there were a group of Orthodox rabbis. I think this made mainstream news some years ago. They were circumcision, just like traditionally like a Jewish custom, right? And I guess there's some ancient archaic practices. You have some like Uber, and there technically I've heard Jews or Jewish theologians explain the differences, or the differences between an Orthodox Jew versus a religious Jew. Non-Jews such as myself sometimes use the term Orthodox and religious interchangeably, but there are some archaic practices that perhaps may be outlined in the Gemara or the Gemara or the Mishnah. You're talking about the Talmud, that many of modern day Jews consider to be quite preposterous, and they will tell you and they will laugh at. As a matter of fact, there's certain Talmudic, some Jews, for example, are so committed to keeping kosher. Now, I don't know if you've ever even read some of the culture guidelines and restrictions, Quisha, and it's not to be disrespectful toward the Jewish religion. It is so ridiculous. It's like, man, what the heck? This is stupid. And a lot of Jews will tell you, this is ridiculous. But there are some Jews, Orthodox Jews, that are so committed to keeping kosher that their homes are equipped with 2 kitchens, where they keep their kosher food, can't even be in the same kitchen with their other food. Now, I joke around. I say, is that why, so many Jews are wealthy? Because they have to be wealthy enough to be able to afford a home with 2 kitchens. I live in Michigan, and some of the nicest homes in my immediate environment don't even have, two kitchens. So I mean, you just imagine the burden. If you're a Jew, in order to keep kosher, you got to have 2 kitchens. Never mind the fact that in many cases, even if you want to build a second kitchen, you need a permit from the city. And of course, you know how hard that could be, unless there are a lot of Jews running the government in your local municipalities. So therefore, they'll just give you the permit, right, in order for you to keep kosher.
Just like the white supremacists.
Right, just like the white, exactly. And so going back to my point.
Into a bank. Oh, you're white here. Here's the loan. There you go.
Right. And so, I mentioned all that to say that a couple of years ago, there was this huge scandal where some Jewish rabbis were caught when they were circumcising the children. Instead of going to a medical facility and having things done in a modern, sanitized, safe way in an actual hospital, they were doing these, I don't know, at synagogues or at home, I'm not sure. But the rabbis, in order to, you cut the foreskin off the penis, there's going to be stitching, there's going to be blood, and so on and so forth. So in order to stop the bleeding, the rabbis were using their mouths, they were sucking the blood off the little, the penises, I hate to sound, but of the children. And the news broke of this because some of the children were contracting these babies. Now, some of these babies were contracting sexually transmitted diseases from this practice. Okay. It came to find out that there was a small set of Jewish rabbis who were saying, well, this is just our tradition. This is what this is the way we did it back in, and this is what we still believe in doing. Okay. Yeah. Now, something said, this is crazy. This is crazy. So who does this? But see, when you look at Judaism and Christianity, and you look at these sort of, I don't want to necessarily say adaptability with respect to its moral precepts, as if the word of God changes. The word of God does not change, but you still kind of develop and evolve on moral grounds, whilst at the same time remaining anchored in that thing that gave you the foresight to see into something that was not, I guess, revealed at the time. And this,
it's just like when when before we discovered, like humanity discovered it, because I don't know what group discovered it, why people were dying during surgery and stuff like that is because they weren't washing their hands. Just a little thing of washing your hands, the germs from when you weren't washing your hands were getting into the surgical room, and people were dying. People were doing that for years, and people was dying. And then when they discovered, okay, this is what we need to do to change this, it changed. But like, that would be like, we could look at that now and say, oh, you see that they were just, whatever group this was, they were just trying to kill those people. Like, we can twist it, because historically looking back, there could have been some radical person like, who knows? Some person whose family member passed away, trying to get this and saying, oh, they did it on purpose. And then that becomes a story.
Right.
So these things can develop, history is not, you can't just look at it in so like black and white. There are so many. One thing that I've learned listening to you, excuse me, is that when you're looking at history, there are so many things that are happening, so many layers that are happening at the same time, that one thing that may be happening, one layer may be more promoted than the other layers, and that becomes a storyline, forgetting that all these other things were happening at the same time and may not may not be talked about. And so when we're looking at history and when we're listening to these people, let's dive a little bit deeper. And I know, like you said, it takes time. Some of it is boring, yada, yada, yada. But if you really want to be standing on the side of truth, you have to take all of these things into consideration to come to a reasonable summary, or even, outlook of what is happening. So that is, this can happen to many groups. So let's not be ignorant. You know what I'm saying? To when we're looking at history.
Yep, absolutely. And here's the thing, when it comes to the oral versus the written, you have many Jews who dismiss the oral tradition outright, because the fundamental reason as to why the Talmudic writings were constructed was because the rabbinic class amongst world Jewry wanted to keep and maintain the traditions that made them their own unique and distinct people, as they were pushed about the world without essentially a country or a nation to call their own. Many Jews will straight up tell you that the oral tradition is ridiculous, it's unsubstantiated, you don't need it. And this was, by and large, an attempt on behalf of the rabbinic class to maintain their power and their influence over world Jewry. So in other words, this was just the acts of rabbis simply making up things in order to keep the Jewish people under their control and to keep them in line, so that they, for one, did not convert to Christianity or any other faith, and so that they did not become like the others, so that they did not become like the Gentile, because they still believed in their unique mission, which was to reveal the one and only, the true and living God to the world over, which of course, essentially, I guess if you want to say, began as the God of the Jews, the only real God, essentially the God of us all. But they say, well, no, you guys, meaning the rabbis throughout, go down the centuries, are taking license. They're making things up that aren't true. They're making up things that were not communicated to Moses. They're making this stuff up because they're trying to enrich themselves. And many of Jews began to rebel against it. This is why I brought up what I brought up when I talked about the Catholic Church, because the Catholic Church did the exact same thing. For one, the Catholic Church was under fire because it was by and large the Catholic Church and its Jesuit subsets and so on and so forth that began to reclaim, to bring into, because had it not been for the Catholic Church, there probably would have never been a Renaissance. Because remember, nobility and clergy were the only literate classes of folk throughout Rome, after Rome fell, throughout Europe, and so on and so forth. And so the words and the works of men like Socrates, Plato, Aristotle, so on and so forth, all of these works were lost. The Catholic Church, once they rediscovered them, because remember, all of the ancient, the old pagan secrets, you're talking about the Near East, the Far East, the beginning, the early origins of Christianity, of course, can find its roots in Asia, of course, not in Europe. So you had a lot of Arab-speaking scribes, a lot of Jewish-speaking scribes. They are the ones who kept the tradition of the Greeks and the Romans alive for later generations to, quote unquote, discover. So once the Catholic Church began to integrate a lot of these pagan ideas and a lot of these pagan philosophies into European culture and even into Catholic theology, that was one of the first reasons, one of the primary reasons why Martin Luther, who, again, you talk about Martin Luther, you want to talk about somebody who didn't have a lot of nice things to say about Jews, read the writings of Martin Luther. That's number one. And then he said that, wait a minute, now this is separate and apart from the sacred. These are pagan teachings. Because remember, the early Catholic Church fathers said of, and this men like Justin Martyr and others, said that men like Socrates and Plato and others, they considered them to be Christian saints before Christ, because perhaps they were tuned into something divine without fully knowing it, because they were right about a lot of the things that they philosophized. Okay. The second and most, this was important. This is why we talk about the Catholic Church. Everyone likes to talk about indulgences. Here's where the whole notion and the idea of indulgences came from. And all of this is important now. This is why I spent 4 videos talking about, and I could keep going, and I'm probably going to revisit this, because this is not something that you could just spit out over Twitter and think you're going to understand it. It doesn't work that way.
It's a lot.
Right. When King Saul, I forgot the woman's name in the Bible. Remember, King Saul wanted to conjure up the prophet Samuel. Now, we all talk about, again, I'll let theologians debate this. I'll let biblical scholars debate this, and they can educate me on this. But the fact of the matter is that many of church fathers back then were having a hard time dealing with that particular parable or story in the Bible, where the woman conjured up the ghost, and she claimed to see the ghost of the prophet Samuel on behalf of King Saul, right? Yeah. And so this idea, this is medieval. This is you're talking about, a society that was rife with all sorts of superstitions, beliefs, and all sorts of fables and myths and ghosts and all these kinds of things. Yeah. And so the church, the thinkers of their day were having an issue dealing with this whole notion of the soul after death. And if you are in fact to be resurrected and rejoined to your body in the last days, where does your body go? Because see, the idea was that if you went to hell, then you went to hell and you were there, you're not leaving, right? This is what they believed. But if you went to heaven, right, why would anyone want to leave heaven? Why would anyone leave heaven and come back if they were in heaven? So hell, you can't leave. Heaven, why would anyone want to leave? You add on to the fact of the story of the prophet, the ghost of the prophet Samuel. The church came up with this idea. Again, many people believe, Because mind you, when it comes to the synagogue of Satan, we have all these theories. We have all these theories about the Catholic Church. They're sacrificing children. They're doing this. They're engaging in pagan satanic rituals underneath the Vatican. All these fanciful ideas that nobody can prove. We just say these things because guess what? It gives us this neat little outline explanation as to why there's evil in the world, because we can simply siphon off the segment of the population or any given institution and say they are the ones that are responsible. It makes the world and its complexities easy to comprehend, and it makes evil easy to understand. Right? It massages the psyche and it massages the spirit because it helps us contextualize in a neat and convenient way things of the unknown. So the Catholic Church got all this stuff going on too, right? So they came up with this idea of purgatory because that is how they were able to mesh these ideas between what the Bible was teaching and all of these, I guess, cultural stories about people who claim to either be haunted, people who claim to have seen ghosts and phantoms and apparitions and so on and so forth. And so they came up with this idea that there must be a place. Now, you can say it's not biblically sound. Fair enough. It's not biblically sound. But again, this is the thinking that went into the creation of this notion of purgatory was the story of the prophet Samuel. So there must be a place for those who are not evil enough to go to hell, but aren't quite good enough to go to heaven. So they came up with this idea that there must be an in-between. And so if you, of course, if you pray hard enough, if you pay the Catholic Church as interceders, we will pray on behalf of your loved one who's in purgatory, and hopefully they can make it to heaven. And then it became this corrupt practice. And we all know the church became filthy rich and so on. So this is one of the main reasons why you had the French Revolution, because the church was mega rich and then the bourgeoisie were looking around. Right? They were becoming privy to all of these ancient ideas that were again becoming in vogue as a result of the Renaissance. And the bourgeoisie in France were looking around and they were saying that we're poor and the Catholic Church is mega rich. Something is going on here, right? This is the French Revolution that we're talking about, right? And they came up with this concept. I know I'm all over the place, Quisha, but take it in. It's a lot. They came up with this idea during the French Revolution of something that they referred to as refractionary priests or refractionary churches, right? Because it had gotten to a point in France during the late 1700s where the church had to take an oath to pledge its allegiance to the state. Because you had this uprising again, because the church was so corrupt, because the church had become so mega wealthy, because it was accepting all of these indulgences to try to pray, to intercede on behalf of someone's loved one in order to get them to heaven. And so the Catholic Church became immensely corrupt. And then, of course, the Protestant strain of Christianity was born. And now look at what we have today. You just mentioned, now we have the Jamal Bryants of the world. But it's difficult when it comes to Protestantism, because Protestantism, after the nonconformist movement began, which essentially, because again, the Church of England became like the new see, the new kind of Vatican, if you will, a version of the Catholic Church was the Church of England. And so people began to break away from the Church of England because it was becoming too powerful and too corrupt. And then it just goes on and on and on and on. It doesn't matter if you're talking Christians, if you're talking about mosques, you're talking about synagogues, it doesn't matter because people themselves are corrupt. The funny thing about it is, again, Quisha, and you mentioned this, as Christians, this is why Jordan Peterson was so right to call her out, because the Bible talks about, again, it's not about you, because you are supposed to go to your prayer closet and take your sins to your Heavenly Father, and He will reward you in your life for the things that when you come to Him with a pure heart, for the things that you pray about and you repent of your sins in private. You don't go around in public all self-righteous, because guess what? Your reward won't come from God. Your reward will come from man, who will give you a pat on the back by saying, "Aren't you so righteous?"
Okay,
you don't walk around in life acting like that.
We gotta call you Preacher Chuck.
You go to your prayer closet and you do that, Mrs. Farmer. You don't do that in public. As a Christian, you're supposed to know that, Quisha. If I were fasting, for example, right? I just fact. and you and
Yeah.
we out somewhere, we going for a walk, right? And we get hungry. I'm fasting, right? And you say, hey Chuck, let's go grab me, you, we on a double date. Me, you, and Antonio, me and my wife, we out kicking, we hanging. Let's go get something to eat. I said, nah, man, I'm good. I ain't gonna eat. And you're like, Chuck, what you mean? Ain't you hungry? Nah, Quisha, man, I'm fasting right now, man. I'm good. Oh, for real? Oh, you fasting? All right, what's you good? That's what's up.
Yeah.
That's your reward. The fact that Quisha looked at Chuck and said, I'm proud of you for fasting. That's your reward. And you want to know why? Because if I was fasting, Quisha, when you asked me if I wanted to get something to eat, the only thing that I should have said was, I ain't hungry. Chuck, don't you want to eat? I ain't hungry. Why not?
Yeah.
What's wrong? I ain't hungry. Why everybody else got to know you trying to purify? Why everybody need to know you fasting? Don't nobody need to know you fasting. Only you and God need to know that. Because when you go out in the world like the Pharisees, pretending to be holier than thou, you're putting on an act for the world, and your reward will come from the world. Your reward won't come from God. That's why she's a phony to the utmost degree, for one of a multitude of reasons. Second of which, she is an historical illiterate, and she knows nothing about the state of modern day geopolitics. Nothing at all.
It is sad, that we have such we're in a time where I do believe the hand of God is, on America, and I do believe that God has given us grace, with Trump being reelected. But at the same time, we have this group of, quote unquote conservatives or Republicans or whatever, and it's almost like they are intentionally sowing these seeds of just division and discord and things like that, when they don't really know what they're talking about. And you're bringing all these people with you who are also new to the political realm and things like that. So it is very disturbing.
Right.
So
and using it and turning Jews and Christians against each other, when in fact, again, because Jews and Christians were it wasn't even fair to say they were at loggerheads, because the Jews were at a supreme disadvantage. You talk about the Inquisitions and the massacre at St. Stephen's Cathedral. I can go, as a matter of fact, that's what I'm gonna do, Quisha, and it's gonna make a lot of people mad. I'm gonna talk about all of the persecution of Jews by the Christian church from the fall of the Roman Empire all the way down through to the Enlightenment. That may take about 5-6 years. If you go and you read European literature, even from Chaucer, even to even Shakespeare, there was no positive depiction of Jews or Jewish life anywhere, almost anywhere in European literature throughout the Middle Ages. You did not see a positive depiction of a Jew in European literature until the Enlightenment. Nowhere in European literature did you see a positive depiction of a Jew. Nowhere.
That is crazy. That is wild. And you talked about that in your video too, where I think it was when the UN, I forget what it's called, but like when the UN basically had said that Israel was responsible for all
62 condemnations.
Yeah, 62 condemnations when the rest of everywhere else combined only had like 55 or something like that.
That's right. That's right.
That, like, y'all have to go and watch this. Like, it is so packed of just gems that uncover what's really happening right now. You have to go watch this video. Speaking of like the movement and all of this stuff, this populist movement, what is the danger of populism? Because we see so many people that are, glomming on to populism. Oh, the populist, Trump's a populist. Populism is so great and wonderful. Help us understand why there is a potential for danger for populism.
Well, because what populism is and what populism does, essentially, when you're talking about just to simplify it, I know a lot of people have different, I guess, conceptual models when you start talking about different political ideologies and different political philosophies. But if you just wanted to look at it, a political ideology on a straight line, like as we do when we talk about left versus right, and then you have the middle, the Overton window. sort of in the middle. That's that's one thing, right? And then many of folk have become so disillusioned with with politics and with many of facets of American life in general, right? And that's both on the left and the right. Although the left has become the quote unquote power, and so they are still kind of living in this I don't know, man. It's like they're a few centuries behind behind schedule, because the left doesn't seem to realize, of course, right now that they are the power, quote unquote. And so you have a lot of this now on the right, where I think Trump, and this is why we're teetering on the breaking point right now, because Trump kind of he is the reason for a lot of hope and optimism, but he at the same time is emblematic of what could be a kind of impending doom, and we'll see. And it's not his fault, and so he's actively doing this. But when Trump came down the escalator, as we like to say, and I remember he started making this speech, because when I was younger, Keisha, when I was learning, I thought I was learning things. I was enlightened, I was informed, and I was, and going all the way back. I mean, I name some of these characters who were kind of like these underground, lecturers. This was even before, DVDs. They used to have a bunch of VHS tapes and all of this stuff, and I started learning about, secret societies and the Freemasons. And I went out and bought this book called The Hiram Key. And, I was reading all this stuff. I started learning about the Illuminati and all these bloodline families and all this stuff. And they always talked about how the end goal and the end game for the New World Order was to create a New World Order, was to create this one world government, right? This is what a lot of these guys were talking about back in the day, right? This kind of underground lecture scene, these books and all this stuff. And mind you, a lot of these books that taught about this stuff, you could find these books if you went online when that became a thing, or you went to a bookstore. These were the kinds of books that you would commonly find in the New Age section, right? So this is kind of New Ageism, this kind of occultism, right? Because keep in mind now, religion, whether you're talking Christianity, Judaism, or Islam, religion too is also a part of this grand conspiracy. So we kind of see the Marxist strain there, because Marxism is in fact occultism, but that's a whole nother conversation. But of course, religion acted, as Marx stated that it did, as a kind of function of keeping one in this perpetual state of ignorance by shrouding them from who they truly are, right? And so religion, the whole point of religion was to keep humanity in this spiritual box, right? To prevent your third eye from opening, essentially. And once we realized that we were in fact the God that we were seeking, once we realized that, then we could rise up and throw off the shackles and throw off the chains of the New World Order. But this is what the whole you're muted, Keisha. You're muted, Keisha. I can't hear you.
Oh, sorry. I was just gonna say, let me insert here. This is
Go ahead.
where the enlightened part of the enlightenment comes from. This awakening. You're being awoken. You're woke to a new consciousness. Okay,
That's right.
That is what woke is, and that's why we're this. When I said the structure of this, what we're calling woke right or neo-popular, like however you want to phrase it, call it. It's this idea of you have to be awakened to this new thought. Just like, and I'm using Candace, I'm not trying to beat up on her per se, because she's not the only person that believes this, but she's a prominent leader in this thought. You have to be awakened to what has been being kept from you.
That's right.
America really is. What is really happening beneath it all? It's this awakening to a new consciousness of knowledge and intellect, an enlightenment of your intellect, a new conscious. I just want to throw that in there so So we're piecing it all together. So we're helping you.
Yeah. And yep, absolutely. And mind you, just to go back to when the Church of England became the representation of Protestantism, the Church of England, like the Catholic Church before it, tried to prevent what they call the nonconformists from breaking away from the Church of England. Right, it's a whole thing, and this is led to the Glorious Revolution that led to the creation of England's first Parliament. So I just wanted to kind of put that out there. So corruption begets even more corruption. There's no way around this. But back to my story. And so this is the whole thing. And so you had a lot of people who had this cynical look at anything that represented authority, right? Because every institution and every person who was at the head of any in the institution, they are all working toward this glorious end. Because once you ascend into the top rank of the all-seeing eye, right, the capstone that's hovering above the rest of us, those were the people that see, right? Somebody gonna freeze that and say, oh, look at Chuck, he must be one of them, right? Because and so those are the folks who actually see what's going on, right? And so you had a lot of folk for years were feeding off a heavy dose and a heavy diet of that kind of material. And so this is how it relates to Trump. I'm going to tell you why. Because Trump is not going to go up there. He's not going to say, he's not going to talk about satanic rituals and free, secret societies and Masonic orders and the Rosicrucian orders and all this stuff. He's not going to get up there and talk about that because he looked like a crazy person to some. But to many, it would be, that's how you know Donald Trump is really for the people. That's how you know he's really real, because he's calling out what we all have known to be true for the longest time, which is that there is this shadow government. When I say shadow, I'm not talking about the administrative state, because you don't understand. It goes even deeper than that, you see. It's so deep. It's super, super, super deep. So when Trump stepped up and he says, I am going to fight back against globalism and I'm going to do all this and do all that, right? He seems to have thrown a monkey wrench into the plans of those who want to see a global world order. And so even though Donald Trump isn't saying the quiet parts, at least, the most significant quiet parts, the largest gorillas in the room, he's not pointing that out, but he's pointing out just enough to where people who have long languished underground, Quisha, who sit back and they read Bill Cooper, they read Alan Watt, they read Jordan Maxwell, they was reading all the books about how the Freemasons are doing this and that. They was reading all that stuff and they was sitting back by it in their time waiting, because they never believed in anything anyway, because it was all working towards this end that we can't prevent until we wake up to the fact that we're being manipulated, right? And see the demonic forces controlling our world for who they really are. Right. And so they just sat back and waited. So now you're seeing this. So now when Trump comes out and he says this, he represents a shot to the system, because as the quote unquote insider, it took Trump a while to kind of gain people's trust. But he started gaining more and more people's trust, because it seemed as though he was really, for the first time, we hadn't seen a president in our lifetime that was calling out government corruption, waste, fraud, and abuse, and calling out the open border crisis, calling out the fact that American sovereignty has been under attack for decades. So he, from a political standpoint, in some degree, to a significant degree, became the champion of all of those folk who for years have been just sitting back, biding their time, waiting to wait. And when they emerged, because now dialogue has been opened up, because you have both political factions, the Republicans and Democrats, they both hate Trump, right? And so what the political pendulum has done, it doesn't swing from left to right anymore. It went from a horizontal divide to a vertical divide, where you have the populists are here below, and then you have the small bit of elites, quote unquote, as they call them, at the top. And those are the people who are working for the oppression and the destruction of all of those who are below the capstone on the pyramid. And so now you have all these wackos have emerged, and then they'll accuse people with sense of trying to silence them. Right? You got Jason Whitlock calling it woke light for trying to silence Candace Owens, silence Tucker Carlson, silence Joe Rogan, and so on and so forth. They want to make it illegal to even proclaim that Christ is king. That is, again, this is nonsense. Hand wringing, alarm bell ringing for no apparent reason whatsoever. Nobody's going to outlaw being able to say Christ is king. That's nonsense. But here's what these people are doing, Quisha, and they brought these ideas with them. And so as a result, this is why it's become extremely dangerous, because you have someone who a lot of people thought was bright. Yeah, she was fine when she was like this beacon of light, who was going against the grain with respect to the Black subculture, or if you want to be less PC, Black culture by and large. She was okay when she was doing that. Now she's starting to tread into deep waters, and you're beginning to see how much of a lightweight she is. She's a very stupid person who does not know anything, who has not put forth the energy and did the work in order to gain true knowledge. She's simply sitting back, watching the world, instinctively seeing something that she thinks doesn't look right, and drawing conclusions based upon some ideal that she thinks is being prevented from happening because there are institutional restraints in place that prevents people from being their truly enlightened selves. You see what I'm saying? And so this
that is woke. That is, I don't understand. Like, if we have been talking about wokeness, here's what I think, and you kind of said it on the video, the long form. You said people think that they know what's going on and are able to you pontificate on these ideas and these circumstances because they know that a man is a man and a woman is a woman, because you know that you feel like you got everything, you got it all down pat. When you got to dig a little bit deeper, critical race theory, gender theory, critical theory as a whole, wokeness, progressivism, it is deeper than that. It is, and if I tweeted, I said, I think that progressivism and these woke ideologies, for just to say it like that, are so embedded in American society and all these different institutions, especially in education, that even when, like, some of us, our head has come above the word and say, oh, okay, I see what's going on here, the body is still it's still immersed in wokeness that you don't even know you're doing it. When you think you out of it, you still doing it. Because it has been so embedded in you to do the progressive thing that we don't even because maybe we didn't do a good enough job, when we were talking about wokeness and critical race theory and all that stuff, to help people understand the structure of it, so that you don't do it with anything or anyone. You break from it completely. That is what we need a break from this stuff completely. You can't just have it to one group, BLM, or to whoever the popular leftist is now, and then take it on when somebody else that you claim to like is doing it too. No, we can't do that, because it's going to perpetuate. It's going to be the same thing like what we've done with racism. Back in the day, the slaves and the white supremacists and KKK, okay, that was the thing. Now it's like, well, we got rid of that, but now we're going to swing it on. Now we want segregated, universities. Now we want, we got to break from it completely. You can't take it on at all. That you have to kill it. You have to take the head off and take the whole thing down. Otherwise, you keep it going, and it never dies. It's just hopping from one circumstance or one popular political topic to another. And we definitely got more discerning when we are looking at these things.
And it's one is any political institution, doesn't matter, or any institution it doesn't matter. You know, whoever runs it, whoever controls it, they must be cast off. They must be cast aside. And perhaps these institutions need to be completely just, just eradicated. For example, I'll give you another example. This is why I use the term neo-populism, because it's a kind of new, most modern form of populism, right? You look at this word that we throw around, neocon. I want to briefly just mention what you showed me when you showed me that tweet of Vivek Ramaswamy. And I forgot not Ian Carroll, the guy that was on Joe Rogan talking crazy. I forgot the person that he was Vivek was showing an old clip from, I think it was an old C-SPAN clip, saying that he was making reference to the war in Iraq. He was talking about how we got into this whole quagmire because of Israel, because of Benjamin Netanyahu. And he cuts to Benjamin Netanyahu during a congressional hearing, testifying to the dangers imposed by the Ba'ath Party, Saddam Hussein, and so on and so forth. And so I'm sitting here watching this, and I'm looking at this. And remind you, when I started to do this whole thing about the Middle East, global jihad, Arab liberation, and that whole thing, I actually wanted to go all the way into the early 2000s and revisit that, because there are a lot of things that people either don't know, there are a lot of things that people have forgotten. Because the only thing we know about is this whole thing about neocons. Because see, when it comes to the neo-populists, because in fact, they are the ones who are the quote unquote neocons, because they are coming with a new kind of conservatism, because the neocons, they're out of fashion, right? It never, Rhino, Republican in name only, whatever the case may be. But when it comes to the neocons, we want to talk about this for a second, because like I mentioned before, in fact, you had a lot of new conservatives. For example, someone in Ronald Reagan by the late 1950s, early 1960s, had openly came out as a Republican and showed their support for men like Dwight Eisenhower, who, many people look back upon and say, well, he was a kind of fair weather conservative, fair weather Republican. He and Richard Nixon, fair enough. And then kind of Goldwater came in, and they by the early 60s, and he represented this reemergence, this true kind of Calvin Coolidge-like conservatism in the 1960s, right? And so you had a lot of former whether they be politicians, or if you're just talking about the American electorate in general, you had these new arrivals, if you will, to the conservative movement, to the Goldwater revolution, who were once kind of loyal to the ideas of the New Deal. They were loyal to FDR and the whole progressive coalition that existed back in the 1930s, 1940s. And we know that the Democrat Party kind of laid siege to the government for the better part of 2 decades after the Great Depression. And so those were your quote unquote neocons back then. But the neocons that we know of today, as you're talking about those who had a hand in constructing, Quisha, I don't know if you remember it, the old notorious PNAC documents called the Project for a New American Century. And when remember, okay, so when Ronald Reagan left office, when George Herbert Walker Bush came in, of course, we had Desert Storm and all of that stuff. And then, we had Clinton, right? And the whole thing, because he's talking about Iraq and he's talking about Saddam Hussein, right? But as a condition, I don't want to get into Desert Storm because I can't talk about too much, right? But as a condition of the ceasefire during Desert Storm, Saddam Hussein had pledged to end his internal repressions. He vowed to end his programs of creating weapons of mass destruction and all these things. He vowed to end these programs, right, for 10 years. And this is Saddam Hussein. He had to allow UN weapons inspectors into the country to assure that he ended his chemical warfare program. For 10 years, Saddam Hussein would not allow UN weapons inspectors to properly inspect his country to see if he had abided by the UN resolution. I think it was UN resolution. No. That was later on, once the war in Iraq commenced in the early 2000s. Because remember, during the World Trade Center, you had what was it? You had Ramzi Youssef, who was an Iraqi. You had a man named Abdul Rahman Yassin. He was one of the he was one of the co-conspirators that blew up the World Trade Center in 1993. Saddam Hussein was harboring him in Iraq. I mean, it just goes. I don't want to go through the whole litany of Saddam Hussein's activities throughout the 1990s. But by 1998, Saddam Hussein had kicked the UN out of Iraq completely. And it was Bill Clinton, not George W. Bush. For all of this talk about neocons, but then that speaks to the whole uniparty, which kind of feeds the kind of popular strain anyway that we're talking about, because it was Bill Clinton too, right? It wasn't just the Republicans. So, but going back, I'm just shedding light on all of this, just to kind of give the idea of how much people have either forgotten or how much people never knew. When Saddam Hussein kicked UN weapons inspectors out in 1998, Bill Clinton said, okay, all right, here's what here's what we need to do. I need congressional approval to invade Iraq because he has violated the conditions of the ceasefire agreement that ended Desert Storm nearly 10 years prior. It passed through Congress. It was called the what was it called? It was called the Iraqi Liberation Act. This was in 1999. This was before George Bush came to office. Congress passed something called the Iraqi Liberation Act.
I feel like I remember this.
But instead of a full-fledged invasion, because at the time, of course, Bill Clinton was enmeshed in the whole Monica Lewinsky scandal, both Great Britain and the United States jointly engaged in a bombing campaign of Iraq that became known as Operation Desert Fox. This was like a part two. Mind you, Clinton had all his stuff going on in Kosovo, whatever the case may be. You fast forward. I'm laying all this out for a reason. You fast forward. George W. Bush comes into office. And this is, again, remember, neocon. This is where this whole idea came in of neocon, right? And we know, 9/11, the invasion of Afghanistan, and this, that, and the third. And, Saddam Hussein. Remember, we still had Operation Iraq, the Iraqi Liberation Act. We already had that in place. So Congress was already leaning that way, was leaning in that direction, right? And so Saddam Hussein says, okay, fine. I'll let UN weapons inspectors in. Only if he gave out these kind of weird nebulous terms like, as long as you respect the dignity of the Iraqi people, we want our sovereignty respected, we want our dignity respected, and all this stuff. And people know what the hell is he talking about? Because Saddam Hussein only allowed weapons inspectors to inspect areas that had been designated by Saddam Hussein himself in order to comply with the ceasefire agreement that he had signed or that he agreed to a decade earlier. So that was the final straw. It wasn't just the United States. It was the quote unquote international community, because the United Nations Security Council had declared that Saddam Hussein by 2003 was in violation of 17 UN Security Council resolutions. He was in violation of them. Okay. Now, of course, George W. Bush received congressional approval to invade Iraq, and of course, we toppled Baghdad in a matter of 6 weeks. Now, set that aside for a second. Here's where the whole neocon thing comes in, right? And this is what upsets me, and I can go into more detail about Saddam Hussein, what happened in the 1990s. It wasn't just some unorchestrated, unfettered invasion, because remember, George W. Bush was a Nazi, him and Rumsfeld and Cheney and all that. So these folks kind of embody this whole notion of the quote unquote neocon. George W. Bush Bush's foreign policy marked a distinct change, at least from the Republican point of view, when it came to how to deal with America's adversaries. Because under Ronald Reagan, they had this idea of containment and deterrence. We contain the Soviet Union, and we come up with ways to deter, to disincentivize them from attempting to expand their empire.
Yeah.
As a result of this, Quisha, as a result of this, guess what happened? Oh, the left was incensed at Ronald Reagan and the whole idea of containment and deterrence. And do you know why?
Why
The
is that?
reason being is because the United States was considered a hypocrite. Why was the United States considered a hypocrite? Because we were cozy with men like Bosenio Bautista, right? He was the president of Cuba before the revolution in the late 1950s that saw the rise of Fidel Castro. We were cozy with the Chilean dictator Augusto Pinochet. We were cozy with the dictator of the Congo, Mobutu Seseko Mobutu, because he prevented, because see, the other contingent within the Congolese society was more friendlier with the Soviet Union. So another, I can go on down the list from Bautista, Mobutu, Pinochet. We were cozy with the Shah of Iran. The Shah of Iran wasn't necessarily a good guy, but Iran was a freer place than it would become after the communist-inspired Iranian Revolution of 1979. Because the left, and of course we had a cozy relationship with the Saudis, right? The Saudis don't treat their citizens all that well either.
Yeah.
But the Saudi government, little known fact, helped us break the back at the behest of Ronald Reagan, because we encouraged the Saudis to increase their oil output, so that way it saturated the global market, which in turn crippled the Russian economy, because oil and gas was their primary export. So what that did was that cheapened the price of Russian oil and gas, because they had to compete on the global market with the Saudis. They did that for us so that it could assist us in bankrupting the Soviet Union, which is one of the key reasons why we kind of still, I don't want to say owe the Saudis something, but the Saudis did us a favor.
Wow.
The left at the time, Quisha, how dare the United States claim that they are fighting up for freedom? How dare they say that we are the country of the free, land of the free, home of the brave, when we cozy up with dictators? Ronald Reagan armed the Mujahideen to the teeth when the Soviet Union invaded Afghanistan in 1979 in order to overthrow the Communist Party that was in control of Afghanistan. We empowered them. We gave them military support. Why? Because they were fighting against our primary enemy. So we were hypocrites. We were liars because we helped dictators. They didn't like that. So fast forward, when George W. Bush changed, this is the neocon era now, he changed the direction of America's foreign policy by saying no more simply contain and deter. We're going to engage in preemptive regime change. Remember that. Preemptive regime change. Now we came under the assault of the left, because before it was, why weren't we going out and spreading democracy? Helping free all of these people that are being oppressed. Why aren't we freeing them? We're hypocrites for not freeing them. Then when George W. Bush went about the business of trying to spread democracy, we were warmongering imperialistic material. We were militarists. We were militarists and imperialists for engaging in regime change. Because when we try to intervene, we're wrong. When we leave people alone, leave them to their own devices, when we accept the fact that there are going to be bad actors in the world, no matter what we do, and sometimes we have to work with them for the greater good, even though we don't like it. We were attacked by the left for being hypocrites. So now when you pose the question, when it comes to the new woke right, right? They are criticizing us for not living up to our ideals, because for the longest time, the interest of the American citizen has been undermined for the sake of what is in the greater good of the global community. So therefore, we have to embrace this America first posture and ignore not just regime change, but ignore the perceived attempt on behalf of America of engaging in this kind of empire building. And so whenever the United States takes an aggressive stance within the realm of geopolitics, you have this new populist conservative right headed by the likes of people like Tucker Carlson, who I give Tucker Carlson a little more grace because he was such a great journalist for so long, but he seems to have lost his mind. And I'm getting extremely more fed up with him as well. But I give him a little bit more grace because he has built up his bona fide, and he's built up a reputation over a lengthy career, unlike Candace Owens, some charlatan who just jumped on YouTube calling herself Red Pill Black and became this phenomenon, this icon overnight, ain't nothing but an emperor with no clothes. Now you have this on the right now whenever the United States takes an aggressive stance within the realm of geopolitics, because the American people have to come first. We have to stop worrying about what is going on abroad. We must simply abandon our allies and bring all of our quote unquote resources and so on and so forth back home.
Yeah.
And so this is where this whole idea comes from. And when you, Quisha, have the audacity to suggest that the United States should be engaged on the world stage, you are then called a neocon, is what they call you.
I'm saying that neocon is now the new Nazi. Like,
right.
The term is becoming so just demonizing. You know, if you say, well, you know, we are a big player, we are the biggest player on the global stage, and we have interests to protect. Everything is not always, and I've said this before on Cutting Through the Culture and then on my own channel, like everything that we do is not always against something. Sometimes it's to protect what we have, you know, and our values and our ideas are worth protecting.
Exactly.
I mean, it is the very thing that has built Western society. It is the very thing that allows a Candace Owens and a Tucker Carlson to speak negatively about their government. Western ideas. Try that in China. Try that in Palestine. Go, okay, since you love Palestine so much, and listen, let me just say this before I have like 3 other questions I wanted to wanted to talk about. And this might just take it however you want. I think Candace, being a woman and with women playing so much of a role in politics, I think I think that's a part of why us women, we can't see how men see, where war and, you know, sometimes things need to be like some people just need to go. Like, and I'm trying to use my words carefully here, but I remember Alan West. I had the opportunity to hear a talk from him, and he said there are some evil in the world that is just so evil that the only thing that you can do with it is to take it out. Ain't no negotiating. Ain't nothing to talk about, because the evil is it is so embedded in them. And that was part of what you were saying in your video, is that you were reading from the Quran, and you quoted I think I have actually I didn't label my clips from you, so I'm like, but I think, let me see if this is
their utmost to dislodge them from political power and to make them live in subservience to the Islamic way.
Wait, that's not it. Hold on. Let me see.
And populism as a concept on its face is very dangerous. It's a very dangerous thing. You know, a lot of people are kind of caught up in this swell of emotion, the swell of information.
Wait, that's not the one. Hold on. I want to find the one that's right.
A narrative that I'm trying to weave. And so that's what was really prompting this. And I called it neo-populism, or these kind of neo-populists, right? And populism as a concept on its face is very.
That's what was I? That you were talking about this man who this Arabic man who, or Muslim guy who said, it don't matter if if the Jews leave Israel.
Yeah.
It don't matter because our goal is to wipe them out still, because the Quran tells us.
I can if you can't find the clip, let me see. I could probably find the quote. And there were similar, quotes like that. But I think I know exactly which one you're talking about. If you're looking for the quote,
Yes, I think it's, yeah. If you can find it, I'm looking for it too. Let's see.
Because it was when he posed the question that if the Jews left Palestine with the Arab, would we love them? Is that what you're talking about?
Yes.
Yeah, that was the words of an Egyptian scholar. His name is Muhammad Hassan Yaqub. Muhammad Hassan Yaqub, spelled like Muhammad Hassan Hussein. I'm sorry, not Hassan, Hussein. Muhammad Hussein Yaqub. Hussein Hussein, and he spells Yaqub Yacoub. Here is what he said during a televised sermon. If Quisha can't find the clip, I'll repeat it here in some of my recent upload. He said that if the Jews left Palestine to us, would we start loving them? He posed the question. He says, of course not. He answers his own question. Of course not. We will never love them. Absolutely not. The Jews are infidels, not because I say so or because they're killing Muslims, but because Allah says so. We must believe that our fighting with the Jew is eternal, and it will not end until the final battle. You must believe that we will fight, defeat, and annihilate them until not a single Jew remains on the face of the earth. As for the Jews, the curse of Allah upon you. The curse of Allah upon you, whose ancestors were apes and pigs. You Jews have sown hatred in our hearts, and we have bequeathed it to our children and to our grandchildren. Now, Candace Owens believes. Now you can say, well, that's a minority of Muslims. No, of course, yeah. That's of course a minority of Muslim when they don't have. Listen, man, this whole thing, Quisha, and what's so crazy to me when I sat back and I watched the interview with Candace, and she's sitting there with Piers Morgan. And she accuses the Palestinians, or I'm sorry, she accuses the Benjamin Netanyahu government of engaging in a Holocaust against. And mind you, you have the popularization of this term self-hating Jew, which is why I talked about the whole self-hating Jew. It goes back to part one when I was talking about this. And I was talking about Karl Marx and a lot of his attitudes about Jews. Again, this you have so many on the conservative right, for example, who criticize Jews on the exact same basis, right, upon which Karl Marx and his progeny criticized Jews. But ironically, they dislike Jews on for being Marxist while sounding like Karl Marx at the same time. These are for the people who have no idea what Karl Marx even thought about Jewish people, his perception, because here is a man in Karl Marx who lived under intense persecution by the Prussian monarchy during the time in his life prior to the liberation of the Rhineland by, of course, Napoleon Bonaparte. And so, of course, Karl Marx's family walked away from the Jewish faith. Karl Marx, being a descendant of rabbis on both his mother and his father's side, rebelled and relinquished any sort of connection that he had with Judaism, because Marx and his family were intensely persecuted for being Jewish, living in that part of Europe at the time. And so, but again, set that aside for a second. I listened to Candace Owens and talking about Benjamin Netanyahu holocausting the Jews, right? And you have a lot of self-hating Jews like Karl Marx, who would say such things, because mind you, Candace Owens doesn't have a problem with a fool like Norman Finkelstein. She has no problem with him.
No,
She
she
has
had him on her show and
yeah,
didn't really push back on him
no,
at
no,
all.
no, oh, no. She loves that because here is a Jew that is willing to tell the truth about himself. Here's a Jew that's willing to tell the truth about Israel and tell the truth about Judaism. And you do have these Jews against Zionism. You do have these factions, and many of them are in the academy.
Yes.
Many of them are in, again, because they bought into the idea, this Jews now, because Jews rank very, very highly in terms of, and I heard Jordan Peterson talk about this, especially when it comes to what they call Ashkenazi Jews. Ashkenazi Jews, on average, rank 15 points in terms of IQ above, above the mean of the pack, or above the average.
Yeah.
And so what that does is that kind of propels them in terms of their achievement within areas that require a high degree of cognitive ability. This is why a lot of Jews are scientists, a lot of Jews are doctors and lawyers, engineers, and so on and so forth, because of their high IQ. If you look at the historical record when it comes to the Jewish people, although they're very different because they were reared in different societal contexts, of course, after the fall of Jerusalem and being vanquished from the Holy Land, right? They're different, but at the same time, there are still some cultural similarities that exist there, right? And so one of those things is when you look at the high IQ of many Ashkenazi Jews, perhaps not Jews from, say, Eastern Europe, who were far behind the Jews of, say, Western Europe, right? When you look at them, what that does is that coincides those with the high IQ. Psychological data shows, Quisha, that those who have high IQs also rank high in what they refer to as intellectual, or what they refer to as social openness or open-mindedness. When you try to measure that as a variable psychologically, those who are extremely intelligent, or at least how we measure quote unquote intelligence, let's just say those with high IQs rank very high in terms of the variable of openness. So the higher the IQ, the more open you are.
Yeah.
So this kind of lends itself to this whole notion as to why Jews are preeminent in academia. It just so happens that academia is a bastion of left-wing thought. Right. Jews excel within academia. So when they rise to the top within academia, based upon some internal cultural dynamics, it's hard to put your finger on precisely what those cultural dynamics are, but they exist. We know that they exist because we can see the disparities between groups with respect to certain levels of achievement, with respect to certain fields of human activity. So if the intelligentsia is a bastion of left-wing thought, and Jews are extremely good at that particular field, or within the realm of academia, is going to give the impression that Jews are leading the charge in the promotion of the secularization of society, just because a lot of Jews are in academia, because a lot of Jews are intellectuals, right? A lot of intellectuals are left-wing. It just so happens that a lot of intellectuals are Jews.
Yes.
You couple that with the fact that, of course, Nazism is perceived as a right-wing phenomenon because it stressed nationalism and ethnocentricity, which runs contrary to these notions of universality that was embedded in these ideas of the Enlightenment. Nazism and the rise of the Third Reich is seen as a conservative reaction to a more this kind of newly emerging cosmopolitanism that became to define the world. So it was intense nationalism that was the cause of the Second World War, and that even further caused Jews to kind of shift them push them into the sphere of the left. And so you have a lot of Jews who buy into these ideas that Israel is the great evil, Israel is the little Satan, to the big Satan, which is the United States, even though they are Jews. Why? Because of their adherence to the liberal tradition. Because within liberalism, to go back to what I was saying, is the idea of universality, which generally speaking embraces this notion that there is a commonality amongst men, that we are all the same, essentially.
Yeah.
We're different, but we're the same. And so there is this unique balancing act between maintaining a uniqueness of cultures whilst embracing the common dignity and the universality of men. When you take it to the extreme, when it comes to embracing universality, you have this idea that through force of will, that is the human intellect or the aspect of reason that came out of the Enlightenment, that all human beings can find whatever that thing is that we as human beings are seeking. When you're talking about the Enlightenment, if only we can rejigger the way we think and find a solution that can ease the woes of all people, because that essentially was the promise of liberalism. So when you see the Arabs, Muslims acting out the way in which they are, you began to embrace this notion. Even if you consider yourself to be a conservative like Candace Owens, you began to embrace this idea that something is illogical in that behavior, which means that it isn't something particular within their culture. It must be something that is being done to them, which explains why they refuse to liberalize. Something is wrong with them because the Enlightenment told us that all men were equal. The Enlightenment told us that inherent, this is not to knock our tradition. I'm not saying this is a bad idea, but there are troubles inherent within all ideas. This idea that what, Quisha? We hold these truths to be self-evident. In other words, the truth of the common dignity of man is so true that no one can deny it when they see it. No one can deny it when they are presented with it. On the other end, once the caliphate fell, that is the Ottoman Empire, right? The Muslim world began to look around and say, the reason why we're being surpassed by the West is because we have abandoned our traditions, because Allah told us to do things a certain way. We are allowing ourselves to be corrupted by Western influence. So we have to embrace. This is why when they say, Chuck, you reading off all those quotes, that doesn't represent Islam. It does represent Islam, fundamentally speaking, and that is the type of Islam that is leading the charge, because that's the type of Islam that they believe is going to last days, which would see them ruling over the other peoples of the book. This is what the Quran teaches, right? And so when Candace Owens looks at the Islamic world and sees how they're acting, they say, nah, they're holding true to the idea of liberalism. Jewish intellectuals are holding to the idea of liberalism, that because they refuse to liberalize, it must be because there is some institutional restraint keeping them from recognizing that self-evident truth, which is Jews and Christians are equal to them. Thus, they cannot treat them this way. So something is blocking that. Something is preventing that.
What does that sound like? Oh, Black people, we can't really expect Black Americans to really, rise from the bottom of anything, because the system of white supremacy, the system is corrupted against this group of people. So we can't expect, it's something that is happening to them. It is not because they themselves aren't, assimilating and doing and acting like, other people in the society. No, it is because this particular part of the system is against this group of people. It's the promise thing.
Keisha, it's the promise of the Enlightenment. I'm sorry to cut you off. It's the promise of the Enlightenment. And this is why you have a lot of people on the right who have all the smoke for Judaism, but they have no smoke for Islam, because they're trying to fulfill the heroic impulse by taking the route of least resistance. Because if you can correct the Jews, then everything else falls into place, because it is the Jews that's making the Muslims act like this. It's American imperialism and racism and all of these things, all of these isms that's making these people act like this. If you take care of the Jewish problem, everything will correct itself. If you take care of the music industry, Hollywood, pornography, all of these industry that is controlled by Jews, then the Christians will not be led astray. Christians will not be tempted with hip hop music and all this shit, because it's Leo Cohen, it's all of these Jews in the music industry. If you can correct the problem, this is wokeness now. If you can correct the problem, everything else will fall into place, right? And so my question ultimately becomes, well, what in fact do you do about the Jews, right? I hate to say put the in front of it, but that's how these people talk. That's their sentiment. So I'll speak like them. Instead of saying Jews, we'll just say the Jews. What do you suppose we do about them? When you allow them to live amongst you, they corrupt your society. When you expel them and try to gather them in one place, the Muslims don't like that, because according to the Quran, for those of you who don't know, not only does the Quran does Allah, according to the Quran, prohibit Muslims from living under the rule of the infidel, the Quran also prohibits the infidel from ruling in anywhere on God's earth. So the fact that a Christian country or a country that is governed primarily by Jewish ideas, Christian precepts, and so on and so forth, that cannot be allowed to stand in Allah's earth. So guess what? The Muslims must wage a jihad against you, even if you agree to leave them alone, because you're not allowed to rule anywhere on earth according to Allah. Jews and Christians cannot control or cannot be in the control of a government anywhere. It's in their own writings. So to this fool, Candace Owens, who accuses Benjamin Netanyahu of engaging in a Holocaust of the Palestinian people. Quisha, let me ask you a question, and I'll pose this question to the audience. Look deep within yourself, and I know it's people making excuses who think I don't know what I'm talking about. Again, argue with me, cross-examine me on the basis of the facts and the historical record. I don't care about strategies and trying to read into what a person means when they actually say things. Set that aside for a second. Look at the facts and look at the historical record. But let me pose a question, and I want everybody listening to this to look into their hearts and tell me if you're willing to put your life on the line for this. For the purpose of kind of feigning to be pharisaical. Farcical, to use the term that Jordan Peterson used. Let's see if you're willing to put your life on the line for this test. If you look at, because again, the Marxist paradigm, oppressor versus the oppressed, you penalize the winner, and the loser has the moral high ground, right? You penalize the winner. Israel has been under attack by the Arab world, not just Palestine. Again, go back, watch my video, guys. I talked about how the invention of Palestine was just a tactical measure on behalf of pan-Arabism, so that they can have a beachhead to try to raise this war, to have a war front to wage against the state of Israel. And they knew that they could garner sympathy from the international community by pretending as though the Palestinian people were being oppressed when no such thing was happening, right? So, in other words, Israel, and we know that Israel is a superior society than the their Arab enemies, because Israel is a liberal society. It is an open society. Say what you want to say, because when you have an open society, I get it. Perversion comes in, LGBTQ, and this and that. All this stuff comes in. I get all of that. But again, try to have a strictly religious society devoid of autonomy and reason. You're going to get a religious dictatorship that is predicated upon, or that is defined by fanaticism. Like, say, for example, what we saw with the example of the Salem witch trials, for example. You suspect a woman of being a witch, you cast her into the water. You believe that the water is a purifying agent. If she drowns, she was a witch. I mean, if she drowns, she wasn't a witch, because the water accepted her. That means she was pure. If the woman floated, that means she's a witch. So when she floated, she was executed. So either way, it was a death sentence. But if you drowned, at least you went to heaven. This was the idea. These were Christians that were doing this to women who they suspected were witches. You would say that's not right for a Christian to do. That makes no sense.
Today,
but we want to get rid of the demonic forces in our society, the witchcraft, all these spiritual hippies promoting things like astrology and doing all this nonsense. We reject that kind of openness. But at the same time, it is that very openness and it is that very individuality and autonomy that help build a country where, again, you have immense freedom. You can do all that stuff. And even though you may not be perfect, you're not executed. You're not meant to prostrate yourself and throw yourself upon the altar of the church father to dictate your fate. You can go to your prayer closet and take your sins to your God and try your best as you can, directed and guided by the love of Christ to be the best person you can be. But we give grace, okay? You can have that or you can have something else. So to go back to this, I'm gonna go back to my question because I haven't got lost. Islam doesn't allow for this. Judaism allows for this. Christianity allows for this, but Islam does not allow for this. Now, seeing as how, Candace, that it is the Palestinians, Benjamin Netanyahu, that is engaging in the Holocaust, and it is the Israelis that have the superior technology, they have the superior weaponry, the superior capabilities, and so on and so forth, which is why they are still there now, because they can defend themselves.
Yeah.
You talk about a Holocaust, you talk about an annihilation, Quisha. Israel is the size of what they say. Israel is roughly the size of New Jersey. Maybe a little bit. If you gave the kind of military capacity to give it to the Palestinians, give it to the people, give it to Hamas. Give Hamas the same capabilities that Israel has as I sit here and talk to you right now. What would happen to Israel? She says that they wouldn't exist.
They would be itching to obliterate them.
Debate over.
Talking, they wouldn't even care what happened to their own people.
Debate over.
Just the opportunity to annihilate Israel. They would see it as holy. They would see it as just and right and
talk
good.
To me now.
They would see it as something that God, their God, Allah, would approve of. That is something they are willing to die for. Literally.
One question, Quisha, ends the debate. I don't want to hear anything else. As a matter of fact, never mind Israel. Like I said, put your butt on the line. Any American spouting off that crap, I don't care if they're on the left, I don't care if they're part of the woke right. Put it on the line. Let's see if you really bought that life. Give the same military capacity to any Arab Muslim majority country. Pick the most fanatic country. It could be Qatar, it could be Iran, Saudi Arabia, Yemen, Lebanon, Egypt. You pick the country. Give them the capability to do what Israel has the capability of doing to the Palestinians and see how long you exist. You better say your last rites right then and there. You better get right with God right then and there. Go get you go do whatever you want to do. You know what I'm saying? Like the song, like that song on Mesa, Harlem World. You know, you had 24 hours to live. Just think, where would you go? Who would you do? Who would you screw? Who would you want to notify? Would your ass deny that your ass about to die? You're going to die.
You're going
so
to die.
When you say, Candace, that Israel is committing a Holocaust, we have been having this debate for over 100 years. Since the UN took control over Palestine after the fall of the Ottoman Empire. Since the end of the First World War, we've been having this debate. If Israel wanted to annihilate the Palestinians, they would have been gone. This is a lie. She's a liar.
I'm going to read these super chats before I get into... I got two more questions.
All right, I'm sorry.
No, it's okay. Deborah Leone, thank you so much for the $10 super chat. The cat is out of the bag. These people are widely being exposed by big influence on the right, and I'm so here for it. Thanks to both of you for doing this. Thank you, Deborah. Again, a lot of these come from Deborah. Thank you. Beware of false prophets.
I remember Deborah. She.
Yes, Deborah is here for it. Another
that sums it up. Deborah's here for it. That sums it up.
C Arc, who had to dip out, says, thank you for sharing your research on this topic today. Thank you so much. And then Deborah again says 3 days. Basically, they would last about 3 days, if that, probably. But thank you guys so much for that. I just want to read this chat. Jeannie says this is a spiritual war that has been going on for thousands of years. Satan has been trying to wipe out the Jewish nation for centuries, and they are still here by God's sovereignty, a covenant. Amen. I certainly believe that. I want to you mentioned something in your video. You said that Jews are the canary in the coal. I think I'm getting this right. The Jews are the canary in the coal mine, and that
Yes.
when they start being persecuted, that is a sign of a crumbling empire. And you didn't really get in deep detail of that, but just briefly, why is that? Why, when the Jews are, what is that a sign of, and why does it tend to lead to a country that is falling?
Yeah, well, it gives rise to it's indicative of. I don't think it's causal. I think it kind of reveals something,
Oh,
and
okay.
there are a
Yeah.
ton of reasons why this happens. It's a very open-ended question, but
And just
it,
in your,
it,
I guess in your opinion, like
yeah,
what?
yeah. You know, you kind of see this again, a new kind of populism,
Mm-hmm.
this like fanaticism, this superstition
Mm-hmm.
that you know there's a secret cabal again, whether they be bankers, right? You can't be a banker. You know, you're a Jewish banker, and of course they're controlling the monetary system, right? And you know, you had you know, many of German intellectuals in the 1800s were talking about the Jews and their corruption, and you know how they were ruining German society and so on and so forth, because you know essentially they were the money lenders and they were the merchants, and right, Jews are the capitalists.
Mm-hmm.
And then when you switch it up, of course, and then you take it to you know, whether it be an American context. Again, there were a lot of Jewish communists in France and Germany and England. And of course, you know, Jews are also responsible for communism. So communism wants to see the destruction of capitalism, whilst at the same time, it is Jews who are the ones kind of exploiting the system that we call capitalism for their benefit at the expense of everyone else. And so there's that. And so there's always something. There's always some kind of grand conspiracy. And what that indicates to me is that you're seeing a society that isn't that is not only losing its spiritual core, but it is also losing its ability to reason. It is indicative of a society whose moral compass is beginning to break. And you know, it's not just as it pertains to the Jews. I take not to get too mystical about it. There are a lot of ideas because, of course, again, that the God of Abraham, right? As Christians, we surely believe that the God of Abraham is the one and only, the true God. Right? Every other God is it false, and every other god doesn't exist. Or you can say whatever you want to say about all of these other deities that you know, going to fail by the wayside, or whatever, however you like to describe it. So the God of Abraham is the only true God. And and I'm not the first person to say this. You've heard a lot of people say this. And and they harken back to something that Adolf Hitler famously said, and I wish I could quote him verbatim. But many of people, and of course, you know, Hitler was off into the occult and all sorts of other things. And a lot of these Marxian thinkers, whether they be Nazis or communists, again, they hate Christianity as well. Because when you're talking about Marxism, you're talking about the bifurcation, of course, between anything that pertains to ideas of the human spirit versus, of course, the dialectical process and the, you know, the material consequences of you know, mankind sort of movement throughout history at these various epochs, from feudalism, and at the end of the road we're going to reach this communist utopia, of course, right? But as that's an aside, but Hitler once said that he rebuked the Jews and he despised them because, remember, of course, Adolf Hitler being you know, influenced to a large degree by Friedrich Nietzsche. And Nietzsche was of a similar opinion that Hebrew morality, Quisha, was an inversion of real morality, or at least it marked a key shift in the way human beings viewed their obligations, right, prior to the Mosaic law. And because at the foundation of Western civilization is Hebrew morality. I don't care how you look at it. You could say we get our political system, a lot of our philosophical methodology, we get it from the Greeks and the Romans, right? But our morality comes from the Jew. You can say whatever you want to say. Our morality comes from the Jew. Different.
So I was just really quick.
Go ahead.
I'm doing the Bible in a year, and I was in I think it was in Deuteronomy, and I'm listening to it. Like, I have the one where it reads the scripture to you, and I'm listening to it, and it's literally like outlining American law. I'm like, oh my God. I'm like going to my husband, I'm like, honey, this is literally our law. And it tells you, I had no idea how detailed the Bible is about, when someone does this to you, here is the right way to handle the situation, down to if somebody steals your ox, give it back to them, or don't give it, like literally God is very detailed on how we should structure our society. That, and when you hear it, instinctively that is American. That's embedded in our society. I was like, oh my gosh, this is so amazing. So yes, our foundation is true. When people say a Judeo-Christian society, we are truly built on a Judeo-Christian society. I encourage all of you to go and read like Deuteronomy and the laws. I don't know, for me, it was just so.
No, you're right.
It was cool. I really enjoyed it.
There have been many of biblical scholars, theologians, and just regular secular historians that have actually described exactly what you just said, and went directly to the book of Deuteronomy, and how the book of Deuteronomy is that is in fact our our foundation for English common law, which in turn, right, this is our tradition, because we are essentially nothing more than a transplant of English society, right? And so that's where it all comes from. It comes from the Bible. It comes from the Torah. The world gets its morality, and you have a lot of righteous Jews. Say someone like Dennis Prager, I heard him say many Jews were thankful to Christians, particularly the Christians of the Roman Empire, because after the Roman Empire, I mean, of course, it began to contract after about the 4th century, and the Western Rome fell, but again, you still had Eastern Rome, but it was Roman society, right, backed by its strong, whether it be its strong government, its strong military, and so on and so forth. It was Roman Christians, Orthodox, Catholic, doesn't matter. It was Roman Christians that, through its imperial expansion, because the Jews couldn't do it, because Judaism is not an expansionist religion. It was the Roman Empire that helped to bring the truth of the Torah to the rest of the world. You can say whatever and this is why many Jews are thankful to Christians, because it is because of Christians that the world knows about the Old Testament, because the Old Testament is also sacred to Christianity. This is another point that I wanted to raise, and this is many reasons why Jews and Christians throughout the centuries, it took time, just like any other, but this is why Jews and Christians were largely able to reconcile their acrimony over centuries, when there was this light bulb started to go off, particularly in the minds of a lot of British theologians who began to champion the Zionist cause, who were saying that it makes no sense for us to have this enmity, this hostility toward the Jews, when we have a holy book in common. Their prophets are our prophets. Right. Abraham, King David, Moses, still on and on and on. Those are our prophets. Yeah. Again, you talk about, again, we can talk about Christ. Again, it's a theological, and I've heard many Jewish and Christian theologians have a debate on the nature of Christ and who he was, and was he actually Messiah, and so on and so forth, right? Yes. But essentially, in order to have, Quisha, In order to have civil society, as I always say, the secular law must endure in order to have a civil society, because at the end of the day, when you're talking about a republic, or even if you're talking about an empire, especially, the state, such as it is, will inevitably reside and have jurisdictional authority over peoples who have differences. And so the secular law must endure in that everyone must be held to the same standard of law, because you're going to have religious and tribal differences amongst the people, living underneath the rule of a common jurisdiction.
Yes.
So how do you come up with this common grace and this notion of equality under the law? If you're going to have this attitude towards Jews, what do you suppose, Candace Owens, ultimately that we do with them? You don't want them among you, but they can't have their own nation because Muslims will try to exterminate them en masse. Even the people who are in fact Jews look at America as their home. The same way in which many Jews looked at various European nations as their home, until Hitler began his internal colonization campaign in order to take over the whole of Europe to bring about the rise of the Third German Empire. And then that's when Jews, many of whom were forced to flee to other countries because of the Holocaust and because of Hitler's war machine. But again, Quisha, our tradition is that of the Torah, and so it doesn't. I don't care if you. I don't care how you look at it. It does not mean. And maybe a theologian can correct me if I'm wrong. Notice how I do that, Candace Owens. I admit that I'm possibly wrong. I don't say things with so much certainty that I could just say a theologian may correct me on this. But because you acknowledge this, does not believe that does not mean that as a Christian you're betraying Christ, or you're showing this lack of fidelity to Christ when Christ himself was a Jew. When you acknowledge what happened and what the Jews brought into the world, does not make you any less Christian. But perhaps by acknowledging that, it could give you a bit of humility to recognize and realize, because obviously you don't understand what Jesus, when he commands you to love thy God with all your heart and love thy neighbor as you love yourself, because a nation is defined by the wealth of its neighborliness. How well do you get along with your neighbor for the sake of community? Because each individual, whether they be Christian, Muslim, whatever the case may be, mutually benefit from the protections that are provided by a commonality that we call community. Doesn't mean that when you go into your home, you don't pray the way you want to pray. This is the whole essence of the notion between separation of church and state. Culturally speaking is one thing, but you have to give a person the right to worship as they want to worship. Because without it, we cannot get along. We will only have conflict.
Exactly.
Right? And so when you acknowledge that Judaism gave you these precepts, it doesn't make you any less Christian. So to go back to your question, Quisha, because I never forget, I always come full circle. Hitler is storied to have said, many say, and I can't cite the source exactly when and where he said this, but you all can look this up. He cursed the Jew because the Jew brought forth Jewish morality that in his mind inverted real morality. And real morality, according to Nietzsche, and then fast forward according to Adolf Hitler, was the strong must rule over the weak. You mean to tell me that I can't take what I want? You mean to tell me that I can't kill, I can't covet, I can't steal? How dare you, filthy Jew, come in here with your so-called commandments and try to tell me that I need to live better? This is what God wants me to do? No, I don't want to do that. And so I think, and this is just a theory, like I said, I don't mean to get too mystical, but a lot of people believe that the hatred and the prevalence of anti-Semitism and all its variations, at the root of all of it is a disdain for the Jew, because the Jew brought godly and divine morality into the world. And ever since humanity, we've always psychically, genetically, something held a grudge against the Jew, because it is Mosaic law that places restrictions on man and tells us that we cannot indulge in our deep-seated impulses.
Desires, yes. One thing that I've been saying lately, something that I feel has been revealed to me, is that culture ultimately boils down to whose God do you serve, what God you serve.
Yeah.
And to me, that's exactly what this sounds like. Karl Marx did not want, it's like, oh, we don't want that God. We want this God over here.
The God of socialism.
Yeah, we want the God of socialism. We want the God of the government. We don't want that God over there. And so and that is the thing that I think people who have a hard time understanding this, that's something else to consider. You have to, we say it all the time, it's a spiritual battle. And we still want to try to separate, all of these things from going on. But to me, ultimately, it does come down to faith. It is what you believe, because it's going to affect your institutions, your politics, your beliefs, your corporations, all of these things. What do you believe? And that goes back to God, to your faith. The last question that I have for you: what is it that Western I'm calling them, this is what I'm calling them, Western Palestinian sympathizers.
Western Palestinian sympathizer.
Yes. What don't they understand? Like, what are they missing from the equation to help them better realize that it ain't cute, it ain't cool, and you're on the wrong side when you're trying to sympathize with people like
Quisha, I said it earlier. It goes back to the promise of liberalism, which I think is why, of course, in the past, leftists use liberals as their cover, as their dupes to shield them from their nefarious agendas.
Yeah.
And this is, the term leftism and liberalism sort of became synonymous, because I think over time, liberals became more and more, I guess, frustrated and kind of disenchanted by the fact that even though human reason sort of abounded in the land, for some strange reason, such things as inequality, war, poverty, these sorts of things, and disease, these things continue to persist. Because the promise was that with the scientific revolution, with the, we would discover ways, we would discover things. This is man now. We would discover a way by on the force of our sheer curiosity. Once we were unbound by the shackles of superstition, i.e. the church, i.e. belief in God, discovering the world was round and so on and so forth. Miss me with all the flat earthers. Y'all can go over there with the Jew haters, because y'all all reside together. They all reside together.
Strange. It's so
The
weird.
Again, Keisha, I told you, the weirdos were sitting there waiting. I started to bring my book collection up here because something tells me I was going to need it. I wanted to pull out some of my old books and just kind of quote some of the stuff they talked about in these books that I would read. And so they're sitting there, and now they've emerged, and now they're coming with, again, they're bringing the force of every theory, everything that they've been waiting for to become mainstream, because now is the time to seize the moment, because now the new world order is getting exposed. So let's expose everybody. So that's that whole thing. And so I think a lot of people, again, discovering that the earth was round. Oh, now now there's more land and we can do this and we can do that. And it became like mankind was captivated by the promise of the boundless capabilities of his own imagination. But once those ills of man contended to persist, it's like this anger, it's like this frustration. It's like, you told me that human dignity is to be upheld, because prior to this became the culture of Christian Europe, was this idea of mortification, meaning that one had to humble themselves. And what humbling yourself meant, Keisha, was you had to, be poor and be meek Some extremist sets of friars and monks and so on and so forth, they engage in practices that involve self-flagellation, where they would whip themselves on the back to scar themselves for their sin and for their this and for their that. And so you had to be dirty and filthy. Again, mortification became the way, that became the common practice of the day. And so with the Enlightenment, when they began to discover the writings of the ancient Greeks, people began to challenge these ideas of the Christian church. When literacy began to explode across Europe and people could read the Bible for themselves, they began to say that human beings, we don't have to live this way. Why is it that the church gets to be rich and you tell me that I have to be poor and able to get closer to God? You allegedly represent God on my behalf, but you get to live comfortably and I have to live in squalor. That doesn't line up. And so the Enlightenment brought forth these ideas that reinstituted, that rehabilitated this notion of human dignity, which was one of the good things that came out of the Enlightenment. But taken to its success, we began to feel like we were at the center, that perhaps there was no such thing as a God even, right? This rebuke of myth became mythology in and of itself. Because after all, if we could be unbound and unmoored by rote acts and rote thinking, because the church is the cultural authority, then perhaps the world isn't what the church said it was. Perhaps God is not what the church said it was. We are more powerful than that. But again, Quisha, when these ills began to persist, we became disenchanted, because you're telling me that as a man, you mean I can't solve these problems?
Yeah.
I can't fix war. I can't make people love me. I can't make Muslims love me if I, and God tells you, it doesn't matter what. He said, if somebody asks you, I forgot what part of the Bible said, if somebody asks you, I think it was a story in the Bible where it talks about how the Roman soldiers could ask a Jew to carry their armor. Right? It was like customary to carry the armor of a Roman soldier, to carry his armor for a mile. Say, well, if the Roman soldier wants you to carry his armor for a mile, carry it 2 miles. If a man wants to rob you because he's poor, or he's hungry or whatever, and he needs $1, right? If he robs you and he asks for $1, give him $5.
Yeah.
You show him this is what love can do. Love can transform. Love can do all these things. And when you try it and it doesn't work, when you try to love Black people and give them all this stuff and they still cut up. When you tell Muslims, come into our society, be equal, be free, enjoy in the spoils. We just ask that you abide by our laws. We just ask that you don't rape our women. We just ask that you don't knife us and kill us in public, yelling Allahu Akbar.
Right.
We love you. And the more and more it doesn't work, then the more and more, again, we try and we try and we try. Because religion, we've become so ideological as Christians. Not theological, we've become so ideological that we have sacrificed. Liberalism to many so-called conservative Christians has become their idol.
That's
and not
right.
Jesus Christ. So
Wow.
it has to be Palestine, because there is no way that a human being in this modern society, no way Muslims are still carrying on like it's still the 7th century. There's no way. There's no way. It must be that we are doing some secret society, the Zionists in their little smoke-filled rooms plotting world domination.
Yeah.
It must be that they are doing something to make the Palestinians act this way, because there is no way a civilized person could behave like a barbarian.
Yeah. Wow. This has been so good. And I think that I know I have been blessed by this, and I hope others have been blessed as well. But go ahead.
Can I make one more point before you wrap up? Because I do, and I talked about this when we had this conversation over a year ago after the October 7th attacks. What was that? 2023. Dang, time flies, right? But this whole idea not going to war, and I'm against babies being killed. I'm against that and that. Again, but Candace doesn't blame the people who provoked this attack. They don't blame the people who started the war. They don't blame the people who started the conflict. The blood of the Palestinian children is on the Palestinians. It's on Hezbollah. It's on the PLO. It's on Iran. It's on all these state sponsors of terror. It's on Qatar. It's on all these. It's on their heads. I just read the quote to you, and that epitomizes the attitude of Arab Muslim leadership. And again, if you go to my video and watch it, many of them were reared in the ways of manipulation by their communist-backed overseers. If you go to it, and prior to, again, the Islamic jihadis were backed and funded by the Nazis and fascists. They traded in their allegiance after World War II to the Third Reich and to fascist Italy, and they saddled up next to the Soviet Union, and the Soviet Union took the side of the Arabs in the conflict because the country of Israel represented, according to the Soviet communists, the interests of Western imperialism. But I want to go back to something when Candace Owens talks about, I tweeted out, blessed were the peacemakers and all this stuff. Like I said before, they used religious figures in order to promote this idea. And this is what communists did when they began to infiltrate the church, number one. And number two, they did this again on behalf of Adolf Hitler, because when Adolf Hitler signed the non-aggression pact with the Soviet Union, many of people who had joined the Communist Party, due to the threat that was being posed by fascism as it began to sweep across Europe, they were put off by this. How could they do this? Again, because these people weren't loyal so much to a country or loyal to some kind of idea. They were loyal to the Soviet Union. And so when we agreed, and again, I mentioned this group, and you can go and look up the American Peace Mobilization. There was other communist front organizations that were trying to keep the United States out of the war in order to help Adolf Hitler. Not because, and it's kind of like, why did they? It's like a contradiction. I thought communists didn't like fascists. Well, they did the bidding of the Soviet Union at the time. This is communist because Joseph Stalin told them to. Even Jews in the United States who knew that Jews are being exterminated by Hitler in various German occupied territories, they still endorse the non-aggression pact between the Soviet Union and Germany because they felt like it was a short-term solution in the way of preventing the excesses of American and Western European militarism. And so this would help the Soviet Union in the long run, right? If it could cause Germany to topple their European rivals. And Joseph Stalin said this famously. He said that, and this was the goal of the Soviet Union, we will overtake the capitalist democracies once they are too frail and weak at the end of a protracted conflict amongst themselves. So Stalin was going to betray Hitler if Hitler didn't betray him first, because he wanted to provoke Hitler into war with Great Britain, France, and the United States. And a weakened Europe and a weakened United States could be easily conquered by this newly emerging Soviet Union. But you had, so that's what Joseph Stalin, he said it famously. He said that this is how we're going to overtake them. Right. He said the person who's going to win the war, he's talking about the war between capitalism and communism. He said the person who's going to win the war is the country that can stay out of the war the longest, because they could sit back and rest up. And then once Europe society destroyed each other, then we could overtake them. And you had a lot of Jews that were like, all right, we'll go with that. Even though they're killing our Jewish brothers and sisters, we'll go with that. But that's what this whole anti-war thing was about. You do not approach war from an ideological standpoint. You approach it from a prudential standpoint. I keep saying this over and over again. You look at each conflict as an isolated conflict and determine what is the correct course of action. You can't say that I am against war. I don't believe in killing children. Who believes in killing children? Who does want to go to war? But it is the rhetoric of people like Tucker Carlson, Vivek Ramaswamy, and Candace Owens, and all of their anti-war rhetoric. They're going to ensure that we have a war, but this time or the next time, I fear that we will not be in a position to win the next one, because they will have crippled us. They will have weakened us from within with this idea of not going to war. Again, this is I just wanted to hit on that point
Yeah.
very quickly. You know, this whole America first thing and so on and so forth, you know, like as if we can't, you know, chew gum and walk at the same time. And mind you, Quisha, look at what happened in Afghanistan. This is my last point. Look at what we did. Look what happened in Afghanistan during the Afghan withdrawal. You had a man who was so desperate that he knew he was going to die. Perhaps I think there may have been a deliberate act of suicide. He hung on to the plane, whatever he was grasping on to. We saw the image of the man falling 300 feet from the sky. A Muslim, Afghan Muslim chasing the plane. Please let me, I got to get out of here. Because they didn't want to live under the Taliban because they knew what was coming.
Yeah.
One of the most shameful and embarrassing moments for America that we have ever seen. A true disgrace. They know seemingly what we in fact, for some strange reason here in the United States, do not seem to know. Do not seem to know. And we talk about, you know, well, why are we everywhere? These neocons, they got us everywhere. The hypocrisy of that, Quisha, the hypocrisy of such a thing, when in fact we have, lo and behold, I don't know if Candace knows this, but we do have an all-volunteer military, Mrs. Farmer. No one signs up for the armed forces begrudgingly. I mean, of course, you know, they may look at it, I'll just go. I ain't got nothing else to do. I might as well go. But whatever, for whatever reason, they walk their narrow behinds into that recruitment center and they make the decision to be shipped and to do whatever it is, to be a pawn, if you want to call it that, has a negative connotation, but whatever, for the United States military at the behest of the taxpayer who wants security.
Yeah.
They sign up for what you say. Oh, no. We can't have not our children, not my boys. I'll be damned if they die on another foreign battlefield. When you got some men, some young man, I remember those commercials. I remember the Marine commercial with the guy, and I forgot the whole slogan they had back in the 80s and 90s. You know, do you have what it takes to be a Marine?
Yeah.
And you got some young boy somewhere looking at that like, man, it was nothing more I would rather do. Even if it meant dying, I will die in the service of country because I see it as a badge of honor. You got some men that want to die in the service of country. That's an honorable death. It's like the Bushido Code, you know what I'm saying? To go back to the Japanese imperialists when the Bushido Code was still well and alive. They would love to die in a hail of gunfire for their country.
Yeah.
You call it what you want to call it, but they sign up for it.
Yeah.
Imagine you having pity for someone who put their life on the line for you willingly. They weren't dragged in, kicking and screaming. There's no draft.
Yeah.
That's what the left was talking about.
My nephew
Come on now.
left today. My nephew just went to serve in the United States Marines, and he is
Some of them
so
can't wait.
proud.
Some of them can't wait. Let's go. Can't wait.
Yeah,
Can't wait.
He is proud to serve under Trump.
Come on now.
But he was like, I wouldn't serve under Biden. He's like, I would not serve under Joe Biden. But he's like, Trump, I would. We gotta
stop. We gotta stop this. We gotta withdraw our troops. Withdraw why? Withdraw for what? So we can sit back and watch the world descend into chaos. We want to see what happened in Afghanistan happen in Korea. What would happen if the DMZ was not there? The entire Korean peninsula would have been communitized, right? Look at what eventually happened in Vietnam, thanks to the left. What happened in Cambodia and in Laos, thanks to the left. Look at what happened in Afghanistan, thanks to the left. On and on and on. You can look at Quisha, you can look at it and say, well, perhaps when it came to certain decisions, certain policy measures, perhaps we shouldn't have done that. Perhaps Israel, again, I said it in my video, Quisha, every nation is corrupt because people are corrupt.
Exactly.
We are corrupt. Israel is corrupt. Every single solitary nation is corrupt, but we are justified because we are better than they are. We are the best out of a worse set of options. That's the way that works. If you want to see 1 million Afghanistans, pull our troops away from anywhere because we got to take care of America first. There will be no America if you leave it up to these people.
Hello.
You want to see it? Then okay. Then be my guest. That's the point I wanted to make, Keisha. I'm sorry for keeping you, but this is the point.
Okay. I think.
You
Oh, go ahead.
ultimately, you can be critical of the United States and what we do geopolitically. I don't think that's a good thing to do, especially if we're in a war, regardless of what you think about it. I don't think that you should be, because again, Keisha, immediately following the October 7th attacks, before Israel even retaliated, the protests had began.
That's right.
After 9/11, say whatever you want to say about who did it and what really happened and this, that, and the third. I'm not here to entertain anybody's theories. Prior to our retaliation against Afghanistan, of course, I know, they were all Saudis and one Egyptian, Muhammad Atta, but it was organized from within Afghanistan, so American intelligence said. I mean, and again, Keisha, the whole Iraqi war was, it was voted. The United States went to war primarily at the behest of the United Nations that voted for UN Resolution 1441, which greenlit the United States invasion into Iraq. It wasn't just the United States acting as some rogue government. The international community was of the opinion that the Saddam regime had to be toppled. That doesn't mean that invading Iraq was a good thing. It doesn't mean that we didn't do all of the right things when we got there. But to say that, well, the United States doesn't have the moral high ground because we make mistakes, that's my point, is absurd. The same thing with regard to Vietnam. Say whatever you want to say about what we did in Vietnam, but we are better than the Viet Cong were. We were better than the North Vietnamese were, better than the Viet Minh, better than the National Liberation Front. We were better than the Soviet Union.
Yeah.
So now you have the left and you have the right with this détente attitude that in order to keep American power and to keep American influence in check, you have to have an enemy like China, for example, in modern times, that is just as equipped as the United States, because if not, then leave the United States up to its own devices, we're going to tear the world up.
Yeah.
Because, we're bad, Keisha, because we're not perfect.
That is ultimately what I would say that they're missing.
That's it.
And a great way to end it. So powerful. Thank you so much. I don't know how you remember all this stuff. I don't even know how you ain't but what 41 years old. I don't even know how you had the chance to learn all this stuff. I don't know how you do it, but I do want to we had our fearless leader of Cutting Through the Culture, Mr. Chad O. Jackson. He jumped into the chat. This is a great discussion, comrades.
Comrade Chad.
But thank you for that. CR says, I like your analogy about the community. I'm learning with mistakes to really listen and comprehend before I react to other ways of thinking. That is I certainly what got me out of leftism and ultimately God himself. But yes, just considering, is what I already believe true? And is what they're saying wrong? Like just that's the question you could ask, Candace, if you want to just be asking questions.
Unconscionable. And again, Jordan Peterson is 100% right. Right. Yeah. It's about her. It's about her. It's not about proclaiming a Christ as king. It's about her. I don't know. I'm not omnipresent, so I don't know if at some point, Candace Owens, it's okay to make mistakes and it's okay to circle back. That's a good thing to do, is to come back. And I remember when she had Andrew Tate on, and again, Keisha, this can go on and on. I know we're talking about Israel. We're talking about this Jew hatred in particular, but the entire neo-populist right, as I call it, or you want to call it the woke right, have a big issue with the likes of folks like Andrew Tate. The red pill movement has become an appendage of the woke right. On and on and on, right? This, they are the ones who are becoming reactionaries. Keisha, it's like this, right? It's like this, right? You are becoming reactionary, because of course communists believe that the conservative element within society was reacting to the wheels of history as they began to because we were all just kind of human beings, kind of living out the natural dialectical process right toward the end of history. And so when you become comfortable with the status quo, when things from a dialectical standpoint begin to progress into the next phase, you react to that change by trying to, okay, we got it, push back against the inevitable, right? Because communism was coming whether we liked it or not. So we had to rid ourselves of the reactionary element that is preventing us from achieving this liberation. And so now you have the woke right that is becoming reactionary. And the reason why I say so is because they are allowing themselves to be defined by the thing that they hate.
Yes.
You have these uber masculine men promoting all this garbage, and Andrew Tate is the embodiment of this sickness, right? Teaching men how not to be men because you're angered at the fact that feminism has corrupted society beyond the point of repair. And so you put on this act, this shell, this caricature of a man, because feminists know and realize that in order to actually defeat men, they must allow women to replace them. And in order to replace men with women, you have to get men to abandon their posts. Because if challenged by a real man, a woman cannot outshine a man because a man is better at being a man. The same way in which a woman is better at being a woman. So get men to not act like men, then they can successfully be usurped by feminists, usurped by women. And so you're reacting to the thing that you despise. Same thing when it comes to the woke right. Instead of being a person of principle and going forth, going out into the world, being the light in the darkness, because you have to decide the type of person you want to be. In spite of everything that's going around you, you must go out into the world and be that. Be that thing. I don't give a damn how many women are feminists. I don't care what they do. When you go out into the world, you open a door for a lady. When you go out into the world, you show a lady respect. When you go out into the world, if need be, you die for a woman if you have to, because that's what you have to do. Because if you allow yourself to be corrupted by their corruption, then they have essentially gained control over you because you are no longer being the kind of person you know you ought to be.
Wow.
Candace Owens, she knows better than that.
Right.
She knows, but she should know better than that as a Christian. No matter what Jews do, no matter what Muslims do, God commands a certain thing from you, and you have to be that in the world full of whatever it is that's going on around you. She knows what she's doing. She knows what she's promoting. She's creating the schism between Jews and Christians, and she is becoming the poster child for this sick and perverse movement that is sweeping the internet and taking hold of elements on the right. As a woman, ironically enough, all these uber, I'm a leader, I'm a man, being led around by the nose by this stupid woman, right? In the name of Christianity. So when he said that she is taking the Lord's name in vain, Jordan Peterson is absolutely correct, because she's trying to bring glory upon herself and her political agendas and her political movement, and not Christ, because she is being everything except Christ-like. Decide who you want to be. Or Keisha, you know what, man? I ain't getting married. It's a bad idea to get married. The courts, feminism, women, no. You go out and you put it all on the line. You risk losing it all to become a wife, because marriage is a good thing on its face. It's what you're supposed to do. Do not let the world corrupt your morals. You know better than that, or you should, Christian. But Christ is king. It ain't about Christ, it's about her.
And funny, because she was mad about those some of the people who had the report being Jewish. Andrew Tate is Muslim. He just converted to Islam. But he has all this stuff, and he tweeted Christ is king. So I just, like, none of this is consistent. None of it makes sense. And I think we have shown that there is something sinister going on here, and we need to be careful in engaging in this and promoting it. And let's as believers, those of us who claim the name of Christ, we need to make sure that the people that we are promoting and pushing forward, that they actually do stand on God's word. And if they don't, we need to say something. We need to say something about it, because she's supposed to be representing our Lord and Savior. And so when anybody, not just a Candace Owens, Tucker Carlson calls himself a Christian too. When these people are saying and doing things that are explicitly against the word of God, something needs to be said. So let me just read this. Our last super chat here. Deborah, again, with a $10 super chat. Thank you so much. She says, last week, Professor Alan Dershowitz was explaining that anti-Semitism is the most dangerous virus because it mutates and is manipulated in any which way that people want. That sounds
It's
like
right. It's true. It's true. And I remember Candace Owens was propped out when she was having a debate with the rabbi, and his
yes.
answer was inadequate because he couldn't properly codify it. And he just wasn't a great debater. He wasn't very articulate, and so all these clips went viral of Candace Owens owning this rabbi, and he couldn't properly explain, in fact, how anti-Semitism has mutated down the centuries. It could be theological, it could be economic, it could be racial, and so on and so forth. It has.
And
Reasons why.
here's the thing. So when she said in that, she said, how can a word, how can it just mutate? And how can we, how can we even know what it is if it's just going to keep mutating? We've been talking about the left changing definitions for the last 4 or 5 years. That's how it happens, Candace, because prominent people can get on TV. Back in the day it was TV, now it's social media, and change the definitions. That's how it happens.
Right.
It's not rocket science here. That's how it happens. Names and things do change over time. That's not even I was really surprised that was her argument, like, oh, well, how am I supposed to know what's anti-Semitic? Because it changes, every 5 seconds. Okay.
And people accuse me. I get it. I do get that. Let me just say this as an olive branch, because I do get it. Sometimes certain people claim things are anti-Semitic when they're not. Right? It's like playing the race card, or a lot of people get frustrated when left-wing Jews and right-wing Jews close ranks. Whenever a Jewish person is seemingly under attack, and then all of a sudden they all come together and they all start screaming anti-Semitism, and it gets everybody frustrated and upset because they feel like they have to walk on eggshells. They have to be mindful of what they say. And so I get it. And I get that because you and I both acknowledge the fact that Jews are fallen people just like anybody else. Jews manipulate, Jews lie, Jews do all sorts of things. I've heard many Jewish people say that, nowhere is there part of their culture or part of their faith that suggests that Jews are not to be criticized, that the Israeli government is not to be criticized. Mind you, like I said, I think I was speaking to somebody recently, and I was talking about how pretty much the conservative contingent of the Israeli government, led by Benjamin Netanyahu and the Likud party, is under constant attack by the left in Israel. Israel has a left the same way that we have a left. In the same way in which the American left attacks Donald Trump, is the same way in which the Israeli left attacks Benjamin Netanyahu. It's going to be interesting too, Quisha, when as Donald Trump doesn't seem to be backing off of his support for Israel and his aggressive stance toward the Palestinians. It's going to be interesting before you have the Tucker Carlsons, Candace Owens, and so on and so forth. I don't know, Ian Carey, because I saw a thumbnail again with Jason Whitlock talking recently about how the woke light, as he calls it, is trying to cancel them. It seems as though he's defending them, suggesting that there's a certain group of people you can't talk about, and they're going to make proclaiming Christ as King illegal, as if it's some sort of conspiracy to subvert or undermine or overthrow Christianity. Again, these grandiose conspiracy theories, these delusions, as I like to call them. It's going to be interesting to see how that all manifests moving forward. But again, there's an Israeli left. There's a left right kind of a split again between Israel and the United States, because again, Israel is a Western kind of democracy, if you want to use that term. I think their politics are more parliamentary, so there is more of a kind of democratic element to their body politic as opposed to ours, which is different. I don't really understand parliamentary politics. It drives me crazy. It always sends me up a wall because I don't really understand all of this. You have to build coalitions, and it's just weird to me. I don't understand it. But yeah, it's I even forgot where I was ultimately going with this. But
we were
yeah,
just talking about the this accepting of some like the Andrew Tates and like all these people who they're definitely not aligned with Christianity, but you don't have a problem with them because they are on your same camp as the Jews.
And when Andrew Tate went on when Andrew Tate went on Candace Owens' show and Andrew Tate sat up there and said that yes, he said some offhanded things before. He's engaged in some things, but with women, I mean, never mind. He's on tape. He's recorded being abusive, beating. I mean, anyway,
a 15-year-old girl.
Yeah, and mind you, Candace Owens did a whole show exposing her whilst protecting her sexual abuser, who I believe was tried and convicted of having molested or sexually assaulted her. She wouldn't disclose his identity, but she disclosed hers by trying to suggest that she was some floozy that was just getting around, because this is the second time that she's tried to set up a man for having sexually assaulted her. But we have on the flip side of that, Andrew Tate. Now, mind you, this is not evidence when it comes to law, because you can say anything, right? Prosecutors, judges, or prosecutors, they still need evidence. Correct. And so this is not to say that Andrew Tate is guilty of the things that he is being accused of, but he has certainly admitted publicly to having done the things that he is being accused of. So much so to the point, again, he told Candace Owens that he is not going to apologize for something that he said 10 years ago, when it wasn't 10 years ago when he said it. It was about a year and a half, 2 years ago. Being the serious investigator that she is, she should have known that. But then she sits up there and reinforces Andrew Tate's recalcitrant stubbornness when he refused to apologize for his past activities by saying that, of course, there's no need to apologize. She seconded that notion as a Christian. As a Christian, saying, yeah, I wouldn't apologize if I was you either. There's no need to apologize. Really, Christian. So there is no need for a man who openly admitted to sexually abusing women, pimping women, prostituting women, shaming what he called weak men for being addicted to porn, whilst encouraging them to remain weak and addicted to porn so that he can continue to make money off of their addiction to porn by the ladies that he puts on these webcams. He admits this now because he's so stupid. In an attempt to boast himself, in order to look good amongst other stupid, insecure men who feed off this manosphere BS, in order to look good in front of them, he publicly copped to crimes without realizing that he was publicly admitting to having committed crimes. And when the indictment came down, he wanted to backtrack off of what he said when he let his mouth run away. You know what I mean? His ego ran away. And he admitted to crime.
Your mouth gonna write a check that
take your butt 10 cash. And then we said, well, I'm not going to apologize for what I said. And then the Christian Candace Owens says, you're right. I wouldn't apologize. You don't have to apologize. He doesn't? Christian? He doesn't have to repent.
I don't know if that, I was just about to say that whole repentance thing just must have went out the window, because
but it's okay, because Andrew Tate too has taken a stance against feminism. Andrew Tate too, so-called stance, when he's really just enforcing it. He's just he is an extension of feminism. He's worse than feminism. He's worse than a feminist.
The red pill, they're like the male versions of feminists. They're just, they don't want nothing to do with men. And I think a lot of them are, how you doing? Anyway, well, that's a whole nother time.
That's it. But he comes down on the side. He comes down against Israel, comes down against the Jews. Kanye West does the same thing. He can blaspheme and claim he's God. Doesn't matter. Andrew Tate, your Muslim friend, doesn't matter.
Yeah. We got another super chat here. Gigi Ryder. Instead of reality of Zionism, it's conspiracy theories about Zionism. Jews task Arabs to buy back the homeland. Violent subset of Arabs tried to steal Jews' land since 1918, killing for being nice to
Yeah,
Jews.
and that's precisely what happened when they began to repatriate. They bought land that was unoccupied. As a result, the Arabs, their holdings, their property, and their value began to increase. Their population began to grow. And Palestine, before it became Israel in 1948, that particular area, the area of Palestine, or what is today modern day Israel, became a hotspot. It became a destination for all Middle Easterners around the region, both Arab, Christian, and Jew. And that was due to, and this is what Jews do. Jews come into places and they liven up the economy, right? They bring alive and they invigorate the economy. They bring with them prosperity and these kinds of things. And when that began to happen, of course, I covered this on my YouTube channel as well. Of course, you had members of the British Parliament were double dealing, and that's when they struck up an allegiance with the Grand Mufti, and they began to foment Arab resistance against the Jews in order to, again, to try to curry favor with Arab Muslims who they saw as being siphoned off politically by Mussolini and Adolf Hitler, who considered themselves to be the protectors of Islam. And so in order to deal with the threat that was an ascending Nazi Germany, Great Britain took the approach that if we could soften the Arabs and get them into the camp of the British imperialists, so for example, as opposed to the German imperialists, then we could use the Arabs the same way in which we use the Arabs to overthrow the Turks. We can use the Arabs perhaps as a fighting force against Hitler and Mussolini. And so it was Great Britain that, of course, gave Al-Hamid Husseini the title of Grand Mufti. And this is when the whole Arab revolt against the Jews began in the early 1920s at the behest, in many respects, of aspects within the German parliament. But to G.G. Ryder's point, he is absolutely correct. Jews didn't come and take land. They came and purchased land. And Muslims and Arabs were living in relative peace and harmony for a time. But that, again, that's a whole nother discussion. But again, Arab Palestinian land was never stolen. That's a lie.
That is a lie. As I've learned and read myself, and just there's so much history and there's so much information out there about this stuff. You don't have to be ignorant. You don't have to just glom on to something because it sits right with a thought that you already have. You know, that is not wisdom to do. But thank you guys so much for tuning in to watching this. I think we had about 200 people joined on at one time. You know, I don't do a ton of live, but I'm starting to do them more because y'all seem to like this. So I'm doing them a lot more. And thank you so much, Chuck, for coming on.
No problem.
You know, we talk behind the scenes all the time. Like I'm always the one like, lose it with these people. And Chuck is like, you know, cool, calm, and collected. This is what happened. This is what it is, you know, and helping me to, you know, understand this stuff. So I appreciate it so much. You just taking the time first to even research this stuff. I'm grateful that God has given you the thirst to for knowledge, and that you share it with us. It is truly a blessing. To have someone that can remember all this stuff, because God knows I can't do it. That is too much. I can't do it. Yeah. But you are truly a treasure. And I think as time goes on, you will be one of those that we write down in history as saying one of the great American intellectuals. I am proud and honored to call you friend, and I'm grateful that you took time out of your day to help enlighten us on these topics. So thank you again. Thank you, everyone. And we will see you next time. Bye-bye.
All right, bye.